Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the program on constitutional government at Harvard. And our speaker today is Edward Conard. He's a graduate of the University of Michigan and of the Harvard Business School. He's an author. He's written a book called Unintended Consequences, came out in 2012. It was on the 2008 crash and the mistakes that were made in responding to it. And then more recently, 2016, The Upside of Inequality, How Good Intentions Undermine the Middle Class. He is a founding partner of Bain Capital, a friend and partner of Mitt Romney. So let's call him a venture capitalist. He doesn't live off the royalties of his books, but he's a successful venture capitalist, and I suppose you could use the word rich, but he's rich in another sense too, rich in arguments. He loves arguments. At the end of his book, The Upside of Inequality, he thanks his readers for listening to his arguments. Arguments are risky, so they too are a kind of venture, public-spirited venture, but they serve the truth. So the title of his remarks today is The Economics of Inequality in High-Wage Economies. Ed.
And I apologize for the microaggression. I think Ed's name is Conard and not Conard, but that's because my husband is so proficient in French. So you'll forgive us, right?
And it probably is Conard, but I just mispronounce it. But certainly somewhere in that French-German region, we don't know where, Dutch, I think. Well, anyway, thank you for taking time out of your precious day to listen to my point of view. I really appreciate it. I'm here to summarize my view on the economics of inequality and high-wage economies. I wrote a chapter in a recent textbook that came out. So I'll summarize some of the arguments there, and some of the arguments I made the last time, I'll make them again as well, particularly when we get to what might we do to improve things. So not only what's causing the underlying economics, but what we might do to increase the prosperity of America's middle and working class. I thought I'd start with my view of American economic history since World War II and the radical changes that I see it having undergone. The post-World War II transition from agriculture to manufacturing opened up an enormous window of uninvested opportunity, unharvested investment opportunities. America's talent rushed to design and market new products produced by domestic blue-collar workers. Innovations created for the war, but not yet commercialized, accelerated their success. Growth was unencumbered by government spending and regulation. Taxes were low, even though marginal tax rates were high. Nobody really paid the high tax rates. Returning soldiers transitioned easily from the farm to the factory jobs when they found women were working in the factories and in the surrounding areas because of the war. The military installed the workforce with discipline and respect for authority. The war damaged offshore competition. And at the same time, America saturated its population with education and found talented but uneducated people who grew far more productive with formal education. And so productivity growth boomed unlike it ever had before, almost double the rates of what we had seen historically and have seen since. The economy grew rapidly from a low standard of living, and blue and white collar workers shared similarly in America's success. Alfred Sloan's landmark book in 1963, My Years with General Motors, typified the times. It contained chapters like the concept of organization, coordination by committee, the development of financial controls. And in a world where satisfying growing demand was the hurdles of success, the specter of competition is barely on his radar screen. By 1996, Intel CEO Andy Grove, in his top-selling book, Only the Paranoid Survive, writes, I believe in the value of paranoia. The more successful you are, the more people want a chunk of your business until there's nothing left. He warns of strategic inflection points that alter the way business is conducted, and he focuses almost exclusively on competition and exhibits none of Sloan's confidence. So what happened since the 50s and 60s, and where are we today? For starters, international trade gradually exposed U.S. manufacturers to $3 an hour offshore labor, And this put enormous pressure on domestic manufacturers to increase productivity or fail. Manufacturing productivity grew faster than the demand for domestically manufactured goods, and it hollowed out manufacturing employment. An unexpected slowdown in the growth of population after women entered the workforce put financial pressure on the defined benefit programs, retirement programs of legacy companies, and they grew less attractive places to work. And while science was growing more complex, progress was gradually slowing down. Information technology, nevertheless, opened up a new window of unharvested opportunities, though, that required less capital and blue-collar labor than manufacturing. And these opportunities increased the demand for high-skilled workers. It also increased the effectiveness of talented decision makers. Pardon me a second. Increased the effectiveness of talented decision makers, and high-scoring domestic students increasingly left the sciences for quantitative MBAs. In jobs where performance could vary, we find the most productive workers are about 3 times more productive than the least productive workers. Information magnified the differences. It made it easier to measure and reward the high performers, as opposed to tasks that are performed in teams in large collective enterprises. And so with incumbent companies languishing, the most productive workers migrated to high-skilled services where we could measure and differentiate their pay. I think you might be shocked at the data of just how much reorganization of the workforce actually did occur between the 70s and where we are today in terms of the migration of high-skilled workers to high-skilled services. And so as the talented engineers retired, they were gradually replaced by computer programmers and MBAs who migrated to knowledge-oriented companies like McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Google, Microsoft, without many blue-collar workers. And these companies supplied information to high-skilled decision makers. In effect, what we found was high-skilled workers increasingly went to work for each other. And so at the same time, low-skilled workers were left behind to fend for themselves. And traditional economics assumes the entrepreneurs will employ the displaced workers, the competition between employers will drive up productivity and wages. But when the properly trained talent is moved to Silicon Valley, outsource their blue-collar work to China, the high-skilled entrepreneurs may never arrive. Research finds that manufacturing towns that lost factories haven't recovered their lost wages. And so with the loss of manufacturing jobs, low-skilled workers migrated to manual services with less high-skilled supervision and engineering than manufacturing, and this slowed low-skilled productivity growth. Exacerbating the problem, services have historically had inherently slower productivity growth. So when an engineer designs a machine, the machine structures its use, and structured use reduces the need for supervision. So by their nature, services are less structured physically. Productivity growth in low services requires day-to-day supervision and discipline akin to exercise. And so there's just greater entropy losses that slow the productivity growth of low-skilled services. The migration of talent to the coastal cities further exacerbated the divide between blue and white-collar workers. Exorbitantly high real estate prices in big cities, high taxes, immigrant populations willing to accept low after-rent wages, and public schools filled with low-scoring students precluded the domestic blue-collar workers from following the white-collar workers to the faster-growing coastal cities. And so these forces divided high and low-skilled workers, not only by company, but also by geography. And we see books like Coming Apart and Bowling Alone that recognize the growing division without fully understanding the underlying economics that were causing it. These divisions made it harder for blue-skilled workers to provide the services to the most talented and valuable customers. Instead, these services were increasingly supplied by low-skilled immigrants who are willing to accept lower after-rent wages. And the divide was especially powerful in the United States for 2 reasons. First, America has far more low-skilled people to care for and far less talent to care for them. Unbeknownst to most people, America has about half the number of high academic scores as a percent of the population. It has about twice as many low scores as Northern Europe. And that leaves Scandinavia with about 4 times as many high scores per low score as America, which is just an enormous difference in the nature of the workforce, the demographics of the workforce. When talent constrains growth, the economy will devote more resources to increasing the productivity of talent, of the constrained resource. And when talent is constrained, the more talent America devotes to producing innovation, which increases the productivity of high-skilled workers, the less talent it can devote to increasing the wages of lesser skilled Americans. And so given America's shortage of talent, we have to squeeze more value out of our talent for the benefit of others than Europe and Japan, in order for our low scores to achieve the same standard of living that their low scores can achieve. And fortunately, we do that. America's talent is far more productive than its counterparts in other high-wage economies. Today's information-based technology frontier, which includes not only creating information technology, but also using the technology to gather information and using the information to make more effective decisions, has proved to be a gold mine. And mining gold has made America's talent more productive than their counterparts in other high-wage economies. As the high-wage world has transformed from manufacturing, transition from manufacturing to information, a positive feedback loop's taken hold in America unlike anywhere else in the world. Whether from economies of scale, good fortune, or entrepreneurial risk-taking, successful American risk takers have gradually created cutting-edge companies like Google and Microsoft capable of mining the technological frontier. And in turn, mining the frontier spins off valuable knowledge that increases the expected payoff for successful risk-taking. It's much easier to identify and solve a problem we're solving if you're solving a related problem. The more likely you are to succeed at solving a problem, the more likely you are to take the risks that are needed to solve it. And so fortunately, today's innovations have also produced competitive advantages that earn excess returns over and above the cost of capital. Were there no excess returns to risk-taking, competitors would simply wait for others to innovate and copy them. The reason you're taking the risk is to earn the excess returns. The more excess returns, the more risk you'll take, and the more likely you are to succeed because you have experience mining the technological frontier, the more likely you are to take the risks. And so Americans have responded to these higher expected payoffs. They've gotten better training, they've worked longer hours, they've taken more entrepreneurial risks than their counterparts in other high-wage economies. And in turn, their success has gradually expanded the institutional capabilities America needs to mine the technological frontier. And over decades, risk-taking, innovativeness, and the productivity of America's talent has gradually pulled away from the rest of the high-wage world. Today, America produces about 5 times as many billion-dollar startups as Europe. 5 times is just an astonishing difference in productivity. Apple alone is worth more than the 30 largest German companies combined. Europe and Japan's talent simply aren't pulling their weight relative to the production of innovation. Because of the higher expected payoffs for success, the behavior of talented Americans relative to their counterparts in other high-wage economies, and America's resulting outside success, I don't find arguments that minimize the importance of incentives for risk-taking very persuasive. While taxes bear directly on the payoffs and therefore risk-taking, their effects are gradual and compounding. Low taxes can't make bad ideas profitable. To generate good ideas, you have to build companies capable of mining the technological frontier. And that takes decades of successful risk-taking, not years. You can't measure the long-term impact of taxes other than to compare America's outsized success to the anemic contributions of other high-wage economies. And even that's hard to do because we don't know how much America's outsized success has raised the rest of the world, although it's clearly a lot. But underneath this success, America's positive feedback loop, it doesn't change the fact that talent is increasingly working to grow its own productivity and less to grow the productivity of blue-collar workers. And exacerbating the matters, low-skilled immigration, trade with low-wage economies, which we buy low-skilled labor from the rest of the world, we sell high-skilled American labor, that spreads America's talent even thinner. And managing talent from abroad by Skyping it in just saps domestic management attention even further. Now, it's difficult, very difficult to measure the productivity of white-collar versus blue-collar workers. But if you look at by sectors, we see large differences in the productivity by skill level. Information-oriented sectors have invested substantially more in information technology and grown their productivity 4 times faster than the physically oriented sectors over the last 20 years. 2.8% a year for the information-oriented sectors, 0.7% for the physical sectors. That may not sound like a lot, but over 20 years, that equates to a 50% difference in the output of knowledge workers relative to physical workers. And these differences between industry sectors surely reflect differences in productivity growth of high-skilled and low-skilled workers more broadly. Within the physical sectors, manufacturing, retailing, and wholesale distribution have grown their productivity much faster than the 0.7%, but they're shedding workers. So the productivity of the sectors which are growing employment is near zero. That's the places where we're adding employment. In effect, productivity growth is pushing the blue-collar worker into sectors that are suffering from what economists call Baumol's cost disease. Sectors whose wage growth depends on the productivity growth of other sectors in America, chiefly the faster productivity growth of our highest skilled workers. Because of the faster productivity growth of America's most productive workers, America's middle class now enjoys incomes that are about 30% higher than Northern Europe on average, up from about 20% higher in the mid-1990s. And America's incomes are now 70% higher than Southern Europe with test score demographics, which are similar to America. European incomes would be even lower if they weren't free riding on America's disproportionate contribution of innovation, military spending, and healthcare profits. And it'd be lower still if they didn't, had far more talent than America to supervise their low-skilled workers. And so European sclerosis is far worse than people admit or people realize when we really get down and try to do the comparisons apples to apples. With Baumol's cost disease, faster growing high-skilled productivity dries up the demand for workers in the rest of the economy. And with a restricted supply of middle-class workers, growth has driven up their wages. But with a less restricted supply of low-skilled workers from a combination of automation, offshoring, and low-skilled immigration, growth has largely increased employment rather than wages. Under these constraints, high-skilled workers, immigrants, and offshore workers have been the biggest beneficiaries of America's success, not lesser skilled Americans. Today, 40 million foreign-born adults and their 20 million native-born children, including 35 million largely low-skilled Hispanic adults, now call America a home. Is it any surprise that the domestic blue-collar worker elected a brass knuckle bully like Donald Trump to fight for them? They're the people who have gotten the least benefit from the success that we've had. So given America's success relative to other high-wage economies, what can we do to make things better? Look, I'm not a libertarian. My dispute is not over whether to help others, but how best to do it. I believe liberals and conservatives share the same objective. We both want to extract more value from America's talent for others. We just differ in our belief about how best to achieve that objective. Even liberal economists agree that investors must create at least $5 of value for others, their customers, their employees, and their suppliers, to put $1 in their own pocket. So we can either motivate our talented risk takers to create another $5, or we can take more of the dollar they keep by raising taxes further. I see more leverage in increasing the $5. So given the high payoffs for risk taking, the subsequent behavior of America's talent, our resulting outsized success, I find it hard to believe that higher taxes that reduce the expected payoffs for successful risk-taking won't gradually slow America's growth. With the rising costs of retiring baby boomers, growing deficits threatening growth-crushing tax increases that leave America vulnerable to a growing Chinese military threat, we can't afford to slow America's growth, nor do I see any compelling arguments to take the risk that may slow the growth. With government spending already consuming 36% of GDP in America, this is before the Biden administration, and projected to rise rapidly as baby boomers retire, I support reallocating spending to help others rather than increasing the share of GDP consumed by government. Unfortunately, the two are often conflated for political reasons. In part, I arrive at my conclusions because I believe government spending, other than giving people money, has been woefully ineffective. I look at New York, California, Illinois, all have high taxes. Have they increased test scores? Have they improved mobility? Have they reduced poverty? Have they otherwise affected significant change? Even if I look at upstate New York, I'm from New York, isolated from the extremes of New York City, have they achieved better outcomes? No, I don't believe they have. Similarly, America spends more on education per student than Western and Northern Europe, and equilibrates spending across income levels with state and federal subsidies. From the OECD, the test scores of Americans are the same as the weighted average test score. European Americans are the same as the test scores of Europeans. Asian Americans score the same as Asians. The scores of children from low socioeconomic families, as measured by the number of books in their home, are the same as Western Europe. The scores of first-generation Americans are higher. Scandinavian Americans score higher than Americans and earn more, substantially more than their Scandinavian counterparts, the darlings of liberal comparison. Given how much we spend at all income levels, it's hardly surprising that the rest of the world has no secret sauce that America failed to implement. If we look at Massachusetts students who score higher than other states, they score higher when they enter school. They don't improve relative to the rest of the country after they attend school. The only schools that show significant effects after adjusting for some, but not all, of the selection bias are no excuses charter schools. Their benefits are limited to the poor. Their effect on scores are largely gone by the 12th grade, although they do seem to improve citizenship. Nevertheless, the NAACP and the Democrats oppose them. Studies of identical twins separated at birth indicate variations in the test scores are 50 to 80% genetic, and only half of the rest, 1/6, if we use the 65% center point, is attributed to the shared environment, at least as the shared environment is currently administered. If we could improve the shared environment 20%, it would lead to about a 3% improvement. Aside from the worldwide Flynn effect, which probably comes from better nutrition, no one knows, no one has produced much improvement in education and test scores beyond the one-time improvements the world has achieved by saturating their uneducated populations with education and by improving neglected school districts, largely after No Child Left Behind. Bill Gates didn't believe the data. He spent hundreds of millions of his own money running a variety of experiments guided by the best experts. According to Rand Corporation, he achieved no improvements. Gates has said publicly it's harder to increase test scores than it is to cure malaria. And he said the problem isn't unmotivated teachers, it's unmotivated students. As an experienced businessman who sees nothing but miraculous cures for cancer, as investment pitches, I see nothing but failure, exaggerated claims, and a lot of wishful thinking. I believe organic growth fast enough to avoid growth-crushing tax increases and to mitigate the threat of a growing and worrisome China is a pipe dream, regardless of how well we fine-tune policy. That's not to say we shouldn't try to improve education, but rather we shouldn't stake America's future on it. Alternatively, we can just give lesser skilled families more money, although this taxes, investment, successful risk-taking, and the very things that accelerate economic growth, employment, and wages. How much America allocates to poor families is surprisingly hard to come by. The Census Bureau, for example, doesn't count nearly half the spending in its widely publicized poverty numbers. It doesn't count non-cash spending, such as healthcare, rent subsidies, and tax credits, for example. Prior to the Biden administration, and not counting the $1.5 trillion per year America transfers to retirees over the age of 65, we spend helping everyone. We transfer about $1.3 trillion to people under the age of 65, not counting money we spend helping everybody on things like education, for example, although it would include things like free school lunches. That's about $22,500 per person under the age of 65 in the bottom 20%, or $90,000 per family of four, although a large share of that money does not get transferred to the poor. Estimates that comport with my own work indicates America gives poor families that earn $14,000 a year on average about $33,000 of additional benefits in 2015 for a total of $47,000 of income. For perspective, the median household income in 2015 was $55,000. At those levels of expenditures, it's surely prudent to ask, why isn't $47,000 enough? How much more should we give before more is no longer a priority? My take is that we're very close to the optimal amount of spending, which is not to say we can't improve the way we spend the money. With tax policy allowing a median families to consume about as much government services as they pay in taxes, and education unable to produce enough high-earning workers to generate the necessary tax revenues, high-skilled immigration seems to me to be the only viable solution for growing faster, spending more, and avoiding growth-crushing tax increases. America issues about 1 million green cards a year. We have about 6 million full-time workers in the top 5%. There are 7 billion non-Americans in the world. If I do the quick math, 5% of 7 billion is 350 million. Probably half of those, we don't know who they are. Half of them are too young and too old. Half of them will never move. You get to a pool of about 50 million top 5%, equivalent top 5% workers who might be willing to move to America. If we could recruit 5 or 6 million of them, we could double the number of top ultra high skilled workers we have in the United States. That might double our growth rate. If we doubled our growth rate gradually over time, it would go a long way to solving our problem and allowing us to help other people in America to become more prosperous. And I think educators also need to persuade American students that they have a moral obligation to get the tedious training, perform the arduous tasks of serving customers, and take the risks that increase the productivity of other people, especially lesser skilled Americans. Let's not kid ourselves. Despite our good intentions, we overwhelmingly serve each other as customers. These are my conclusions and the reasoning behind them, and I'd love to hear your conclusions and debate them. I've thrown down the gauntlet on conservatism.
All right, Ed, that's wonderful. Vigorous defense of the 1%.
There you go.
Yeah. So, well, questions.
So, Harvey, I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm gonna.
That's why you started, Paul.
Impolite. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, this is Paul Peterson versus Ed Conard.
I know who Paul is from the last time.
So I missed a little there when the sound, but I got the education part in detail. I do have questions about education. I have some points to make there, but I also wanted your comment. And maybe I can save those education questions for a little later, let other people participate. But I'd like to ask about the pandemic, because you don't talk about that. And it strikes me that the pandemic has been the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich that we have seen. That's even greater. Maybe not. I mean, your presentation makes me a little rethinking that. Maybe it isn't. Maybe some of these other trends have also increased inequality enormously worldwide, but I don't think so, because you're just talking about how general improvements in wealth spill over through Baumol effects and other effects. So the spillover effects are so positive for all groups, but now with the pandemic, we are seeing wealth concentrated in the Zooming communities, at the great expense of the working community. So only exacerbating the trends you've been talking about without getting some benefits from that. So I'd like to hear your observations on that.
So, well, like every recession, the least skilled worker is the first one laid off and the last one hired. So does that really, does the lowest skilled workers suffer from recessions and setbacks more than everybody else? Without a doubt. That's the history of the world. And, we've tried to put a lot of programs like unemployment benefits and things like that in to try to buffer as best we can, but there's no getting around that fact. I think there's a second component which is complicated. I think to understand what wealth is, it's not as though there's production in a cave that we could pull out and give to people and make them better off. And so what's really happening when you just use the word wealth here is interest rates have fallen and the multiple on future cash flows in the market has risen. What exactly that is quite ephemeral from a economics point of view. It's not like we can, it's not like we can teleport things back from the future and use them today. And it's not clear that anything's actually changed in the future in terms of how much production is going to flow from one person to another person in the future. You owned a share of Google. Google's future probably hasn't changed that much. It might have changed a little bit because, we're all Zooming and we've all sort of changed our ways, and that's going to change the way it benefits some people more than other people. Certainly didn't benefit people that were working in the restaurant industry. But I think an awful lot of what you're seeing in the increase in wealth is an expansion in the multiple and the valuation of future cash flows, not actually an increase in the amount of future cash flows, future production that we're actually going to have. And so I'm not sure, even though in the marketplace, it would appear that way. And, I think we always have to be respectful of the markets because they prove to be right more often than they prove to be wrong. They prove to be wrong plenty often, but they're more reliable than any other forecasts of the future. So I think we have to be very respectful of it. But when the interest rate is dropped and the multiple is expanded, it's not anywhere near as clear to me or any other economist that, in fact, wealth has truly grown. But, I don't know that I've answered the question. It's a very difficult and complicated question to answer. I do think, and this I think is always a problem, if we said, we go back to the heart of the financial crisis, we had a lot of money flowing in from the trade deficit. It's flowing into our banking system. There wasn't a lot of use for that money. Get a little technical and say we could have had a Keynesian paradox of thrift, forget about all that. But the money flowed into subprime mortgages and into subprime consumption, and resources got allocated to satisfy the demand being created by subprime consumption. It blew up. We can no longer go down that path. A lot of people lost their jobs as a result. Those have to get reallocated to new uses. A lot of those got reallocated into the restaurant and entertainment industry. It was one of the faster growing industries coming out of the financial crisis. Now we get COVID and it blows up the very place where a lot of those workers got reallocated to. The question now will be, can they go back to those places where they were before, or do we now have to find new uses for them? Anytime you have to find new uses, it takes a long time for the creativity of smart people to go, how can I use these people in a different way? I was using them in a very simple way to do construction, subprime consumption, a lot of redecorating, rebuilding of homes because of the money that was flowing to the mortgage industry. That industry collapses. Now it's booming back. Now we might want to dampen that down because it seems like we're overshooting and misallocating resources again. But we're not actually in a position right now where we want to raise interest rates and slow down the demand for housing. We're in this position where we want low interest rates, and that's causing housing to boom. We know the history of the economy is when housing booms, you better be careful because that's often a misallocation. And that's sort of what we're seeing today. And so we're seeing a lot of those restaurant workers get sucked into the construction industry at the moment. It's probably a good thing for a temporary solution. I'm not sure it's a good thing for a long-term solution. And ultimately, it's going to get back to education and could we help those people become more skillful and have jobs where the problem with being unskillful is if I hire you and you have a lot of on-the-job training, then I don't want to fire you come to a recession because I got to retrain the next guy I hire. But if you're very low skilled and you don't have a lot of training, it's not that expensive for me to let you go and then rehire you back or rehire somebody else back later on because you don't have the training to make it expensive for me to do that. And so the people who are like that, they all stay hired, college graduates, and all the people at the bottom end of the skill spectrum, they get the ones who get laid off and absorb a disproportionate share of the blow. But, that's a long-winded answer. I'm not sure I answered the question as best I could.
Thank you for that. I do have some points on education, but I don't want to monopolize things. So why don't I let some folks raise the topics on their mind?
Yeah, we'll have time for you probably later, Paul, again. So why don't we start with Tom Palmer and then Jeff Bristol?
Good afternoon. You said that that admitting a lot of higher skilled immigrants would help solve our problems. And I wonder if we have the ability, not the will, but do we have the ability to do that in any reasonable frame of time? to identify them and let them in?
Well, I don't think we have the political will or political ability. We might not, right? We do issue 1 million green cards a year. So, what would I do? I would reallocate the 1 million green cards to the most skillful people in the world. I'd go out and recruit them, and I'd let them know that we're open for business. If you say we have 120 million full-time workers, 5%, 6 million, we're issuing 1 million green cards a year. Now, you do have to issue them to the people's families and such, but you go get a bunch of 25-year-old, 30-year-olds fresh out of college. There's probably not enough of them every year to get 1 million, but in fairly short order, I think the goal should be 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, as many as we can possibly get our hands on. Because we know this, when they come to America and they start working at the technological frontier, which is largely in America, the productivity soars. So wherever they come from, when they come here and start to work at our industries, their productivity is in the range of double. I'm gonna guess. I wouldn't be shocked if it was more than double. It could be less. I'm guesstimating it. And so, 1 million green cards a year. Yeah, we have the capacity to bring in 5 million new people in the next 5 years. And I think what I would want to do there is, as you increase the ratio of high skilled to low skilled, I think a couple of things happen. A lot of them are going to go off and innovate. A lot of them are going to go off and contribute to, hey, I can make money by figuring out how to put low skilled workers to work and be entrepreneurial in that way. They're going to provide more supervision to our low skilled workforce, and they're going to create more demand. So right now we got Google Skyping in computer programmers from Romania, and the teachers and the waitresses and the truck drivers, and they're all in Romania. If we brought those people here, oh, by the way, they're all working for us, because it's not like Google says, hey, I can't get talent, so I guess I won't grow. They find ways to get the talent. Now, if we were to bring those, and what they're doing, by the way, is they're arbitraging on the difference in rent between being in San Francisco in the United States and being in Romania, and they're putting that money in their pocket. We bring those people here, they're going to increase the demand for school teachers, doctors, nurses, truck drivers, waitresses, you name it, okay? That's going to drive up the wages if we change the relative ratio of high skilled to low skilled. Now, one answer is we can grow faster. We can bring more low skilled workers in. We'll get an increase in employment rather than an increase in wages. If we instead change the ratio, we're going to drive up the wages. Our higher wage is going to redistribute income from our high skilled to our low skilled? Yes. Is it going to slow down growth? Yeah, it's got to, because we're going to have less labor and in a ratio. And so, the growth will be faster, but it's going to be slower than it could have been if we'd have brought in people at both skill levels. But I think, what we want to do is create a great America for people at all skill levels. And the way to do that is to try to drive up the wages of our lowest skill workers. And the way we're going to do that, it's going to be very difficult to increase their productivity. That's the argument I made on education. The trick is we get the most talented people and we get their productivity up, and we get more of them, because anybody who comes here is going to double their productivity at the high level. It'll drive up the demand, it'll drive up the wages, and we'll all be better off for that. And then what's going to happen is, who's going to pick the peaches? Yeah, they're not going to be grown in California where there's no water. They're going to be grown in Peru. You want to push the low skilled. In effect, you want to push the low-skilled jobs out of the country. You want those in Mexico. You want those in Peru. You want those in China. And then you want the people in the United States, even though they're low-skilled, they have very high wages, and you're being very careful about how you allocate that labor, because it's very expensive. And I live in the Hamptons. There's $1 billion of landscaping out there. There won't be $1 billion of landscaping if the price is $50 an hour. The reason there's all that landscaping is because the price is $7.50 an hour, because there's an enormous supply of labor. And it's true that the labor creates its own demand. You bring in another immigrant, it's going to create demand. The question is, at what marginal product of labor? If you're bringing somebody in and what they're doing is landscaping somebody's hedges, or they're a low-skilled waiter waiting on a low-skilled waiter, the world wage for that's $3 an hour. Now, it's possible that when you bring it into the American infrastructure, it's $7 an hour or $12 an hour. Okay, but we want $25 an hour. We don't want $12 an hour. But we'll take 12 if 12 is all we can get. But if we got 12, we want 13. And if we got 13, we want 14, we want 15, we want 25. We want to keep putting demand, increasing the demand, and putting pressure that raises those wages up. And if you do that, okay, things that happen right now, if I'm an employer and you're not a good employee, I just let you go and go find somebody else. If there's a shortage of employment, I'm going to care for you. I'm going to train you. I'm not going to let you walk out the door because I might not be able to get somebody else. And if I don't get somebody else, I lose the customer to the person who got somebody else. I'm going to be a lot more careful and a lot more thoughtful about my low-skilled workers. Now I just go, hey, there's a recession, fire them. I'll hire them back when there isn't a recession. And part of that has to do with the supply and demand. But last one more point, which is there's two alternatives to this. There's let the market do it, let the government do it. My sense is I'm always the survival of the fittest, and random mutation and survival of the fittest is a process that's going to get us to optimal. I'm not talking about humans, I'm talking about ideas, analysis, policy. So we can have a bunch of rent-seeking politicians on the left and the right trying to do what's best for their constituencies and sub-optimize it, doing their inefficient analysis, or we can just increase the demand by bringing the people in and letting the market allocate the resources. And we know what it'll do if we restrict the supply of low-skilled labor relative to high, it'll drive up the wages of the low-skilled worker.
So if I could have one very quick follow-up, I worry about the rest of the world in the long term. And I've always wondered whether taking so many of the best and the brightest and those with initiative and drive in the rest of the world, bringing them to this country and presumably letting them stay forever, will that have a noticeable effect on these poor countries?
Yes, I think it would, but my guess is this, that, I have an 18-year-old daughter. I worry about my daughter and her children. That's all I really care about. What's the world going to be like 50 years from now, 100 years from now? I think the world's going to be a divide between us and China. I hope it's not. I once saw George Shultz stand up and say the only thing that matters is not letting that happen. I think we should be trying to do everything we can to be allies between us and China, but I think we have to have a plan, which is if the world divides between us and China, how strong is our side of the equation? I mean, they are a billion smart, hardworking people. We're 350 million. So I look at Europe and I look at the contribution of America relative to Europe, and I say, yeah, Europe's going to be helpful, but a lot weaker than it ought to be. And so, I look and say, if we have more talented people in our tent and we are a stronger tent, we're going to attract more people to our tent too, whether they stay in their home countries or not. So it's hard for me to know. And I go, look, if we weaken Europe as an example because we took all their talent and brought it here, yeah, but their talent would be twice as productive. If you look at the contribution of innovation that we've provided for Europe, we've produced it all. Not all of it, but you talk 5 times as many billion-dollar startups, down from 10 times before, but a couple of years before. So the difference in the productivity is enormous. So I don't know how much priority you put on the divide between, the free world and the unfree world, or however you want to describe it. It scares me. I think we have to be a lot stronger, in order to succeed. I worry about Europe on its own not pulling its weight. And do you think Latin America is going to save us? Is Africa going to save us? Is Southeast Asia going to save us? Maybe Southeast Asia will save us. I don't know. But, if we take some of those talented people and we bring them here and they produce some valuable innovation, and oh, by the way, some of our low skilled workers capture some of the value because of the effects of increasing the demand. Is the world going to be better off? I think it is, but it's a legitimate concern. So what I have to think about it.
Jeff Bristol and then David Epstein, please.
Yeah, hey, it was an interesting article. It was a good talk. So I need you to kind of talk me off the edge here, because you kind of started making me think that some of Donald Trump and American compasses and those folks' points might be right. So I want you to convince me that they're wrong. So
wait, it's hard to hear.
I'm sorry, am I not?
It just breaks up a little bit, but I'm trying very carefully to hear.
So,
very garbled.
It is very garbled?
A little garbled. Just go slowly and talk loud and we'll get it. But start again.
So here's the shorter version of my question. So if you think about a lot of the people today that are pushing industrial policy, kind of, I don't want to quite say a command control economy on the right, but something close to that. From what you're saying, it almost sounds like that's an alternative solution, right? Because what you're saying is, we need to import people from the rest of the world, which I think has some security issues, right? Because especially if we're in competition with the rest of the world with China, if we're getting our peaches from Peru and Peru goes to China, then where do we get our peaches? And of course, if it's not peaches, that's worse, right? So it seems to me the Trump argument of build a wall and reindustrialize the United States, if we have this massive supply of underutilized low-wage labor, that seems like a pretty good argument now, right? Because we have this labor that's not being utilized. If you just return to some 1960s style economy, we'll raise their wages. We will have a stronger nationalized industrial core, and we'll be insulated from the world, and we'll be able to help Americans rather than bringing people in from abroad. Now, intrinsically, I don't like that idea, and I don't think that it's right, but it kind of seems like your argument is pointing in that direction. So why would that not be an alternative to just importing high-skilled labor? Because, in that model, as the low-skilled labor industrializes, it should bootstrap itself into high-skilled labor eventually, right?
Okay,
So,
I think I understand the question. So I disagree strongly with the, I know it's not your proposal. It's a proposal that's out there, I'll call it the Oren Case proposal, but, okay. I disagree strongly with the proposal. I think it's very, very mistaken. I don't think we're going back to the 1960s I can reiterate a lot of the reasons why I don't think it's possible. Nor do I think our low-skilled workers are suddenly going to get educated and become high-skilled workers. I think they're going to remain low-skilled workers. So, and I don't believe that my policy is very much like that policy at all. So, okay, so I'm going to address three elements of it. So why don't I think my policy is like that? Because we are setting a policy on immigration, whatever the policy is. So there's no getting around the fact that we have an immigration policy and we could change it. I think that for me is the logical intervention, and then we let the free market do everything else. I don't think, we think the Oren Hatch proposals the Oren Case proposals are very much the opposite. Let's dig our hands in and try to return to the 1960s. Okay. Now, before I say 1960s, I'll just say one other thing, which is there are two ways to run the world. One is, this is the world of ideas, mind you, not the world of people, but the world of ideas. Random mutation, let's call that innovation, and then survival of the fittest. We'll see which ideas are actually going to work. The world is very complex. Why do dogs and cats emerge? I don't know, but they emerge and they're probably quasi-optimized. The alternative always to me is analysis. Someone says, let me explain to you why cats are not the right thing to emerge, and it really should have been something else, and it shouldn't have been dogs, and it should have been something else. How much confidence do you have in that analysis? From my perspective, it's full of mistakes. It's full of unintended consequences. It's incomplete. It's full of good intentions. It's a disaster. Now, do we sometimes get it right? Sure, sometimes we get it right, but mine's let the free world market decide, let competition figure it out. That's how I view the other one. Now, why I think we're not going back to the 1960s? There's $3 if you can ship labor on a boat, you can get it for $3 an hour. We have to contend in that world. Now we can say, we're not going to buy anything for $3 an hour, but that makes us uncompetitive. That slows down our growth. If Chinese labor was free, how much of it should we buy? All of it. Okay. Why should we let the Chinese buy their free labor if we can buy their free labor for free? Okay. So the idea that we're not going to buy it. We're going to let the rest of the world buy it. We're going to let China buy it, for example. And what we're going to do is make it all high cost. And somehow we're going to be competitive with China 50 years from now. I think we're kidding ourselves. And the notion that we could take our talented people who, given the current environment, which is information technology has opened up all these opportunities, but have largely been, the fossil record works like this, okay? Some mutation finds the cat-like niche. Then there's an explosion of competition as all the niches get a variation, as all the niches get filled. Then they compete down to a small number of competitors that are left in the niche at the end of the epish, if you will. That's what happened in manufacturing. The niches got filled. Okay. The competition is there. There's no excess returns. Then $3 an hour labor hit us. A lot of it moved overseas. We got automation. The automation allowed the output to grow faster than the demand. So the employment shrank down. Somehow that is what the survival of the fittest world did, presumably because it was optimal. And then, I'm not a big believer in God, but God gave us information technology and said, here's another whole area for you to harvest. Now, unfortunately, that area doesn't require a lot of blue collar labor, does increase the importance of high scores and intelligence. And we went and did the logical thing, which was to allocate our people to the most valuable opportunity. And unfortunately, that is, they're increasing their own productivity by creating information technology and gathering information, using it to make decisions. It's causing them to get more and more productive. The idea that we would take them off of that, remember, talent is the constraint. So if you want to have them go work on manufacturing, you got to take them off information technology. Well, the free market said this is where the value is. The idea that Orrin Case is going to take him off of that and move him over here because he's smarter than nature is very hard for me to believe. And so I go, we got to let this process carry itself out, which is it's going to be smart people working for smart people to make smart people more productive. Now, we get artificial intelligence. That might not be the case anymore. Something else might happen. We get global warming and we need nuclear fusion. We might get back to a very capital intensive economy, in which case we're going to be constrained by savings and interest rates are going to matter. And we're going to wish we didn't borrow all this money and consume it, by the way. But, so this idea, I see them as engineering something. I see me as going, look, I see what the constraint to growth is. It's talent. In an information economy, this constraint is talent. Let's just relieve the constraint. And we can. All we got to do is change the immigration policy and we've relieved the constraint. And then let the survival of the fittest random mutation process work its magic for us. So I see it's long-winded. I see it as complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and I'm very much opposed. I think it's well-intended but misguided, like so many things I see.
The only Orrin Cassian part of you, Ed, seems to be the shaming, the moral shaming part of smart people to have to do the work of others. But I think you undermine that by just bringing in people who don't have to be shamed. But so now David Epstein and then
it's a pithy insight into what I'm saying.
Bernard Trout. So first, David Epstein.
Okay.
Thank you for this article and talk. As a very crude summary of your view of income inequality, it seems to me, I would say it's that the current distribution of income is effectively allocating labor to its most productive uses. And we see that by the US rate of productivity growth, perhaps by the rate of productivity growth as adjusted for our test scores. But there's an alternative that I've read of how to assess our income inequality, which is a kind of Keynesian demand side view, which is that unequal incomes suppress demand because the rich save a greater share of their income. And so if the poor had more, we would be more productive because there would be more demand. And I wondered how you would either reconcile that with your view or whether you think it has any merit at all, or how you would weigh it against your supply side analysis.
So yeah, I would say it has no merit at all, but so I think I was being a little funny and trying to be a little cute when I said that. I think that argument in general overlooks investment. It assumes that the only thing that people do is consume. So it is the case, in my case, I have a lot of money, I have a lot of income coming from, all of my investments and things like that. I consume what I'm going to consume. I don't have time to consume as much money as I have. So where does all the incremental money go? It's not like I'm taking the production that's flowing to me and storing it in a cave and it's sitting there unused and somehow we can go in a cave and get it and increase everybody else's prosperity. all the production that's flowing to me is going to investment. So I think all we're really talking about, what the government really does largely is drive from investment to consumption. It reallocates income from me by taxing it and saying, hey, I'm gonna move it to a consumer, a poorer consumer who's gonna consume it rather than you investing it. Because at the end of the day, all the production is put to work. We produce as much as we produce, forget about the money, forget about the taxes, and then we decide how much of that are we going to consume, about 80% of it, how much of that are we going to invest? And so all we can really do is go, let's take some of the investment and consume more of the investment. Let's make it 85-15. Now I look in the world in the future and I say, is that going to help me better off 50 years from now? I see that creating problems. I want to push less consumption, more investment. And I understand the logic of this, which is, who cares about my pool, okay? The less pools I have, the less, the smaller my pool is in my backyard, the better the rest of the world's gonna be. So what you wanna get your hands on is my consumption. What you end up getting your hands on is my investment. And so, this idea that, hey, rich people don't have anything to do with their money because they can't consume it, I don't know. I've got, people working on venture capital, people working on managing companies more effectively. It just goes on and on and on. It's just tons of people and staff that I've hired indirectly by giving them my money, trying to find great investment opportunities in the economy. So, none of that's sitting idle unused. We can go down the path of Keynesian paradox of thrift, but I won't. Because the problem is if you can't store the production, so if people start saving but they don't invest, then we're going to shut down the factories and then we're going to lose the production. So I do think we have to a certain extent suffered a Keynesian paradox of thrift, largely because we run up large trade deficits, because the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, save a lot more money than they invest and consume in their economies. They've pushed that problem off to the United States by running trade surpluses. We have to put that excess savings to work. Those excess savings flowed into subprime consumption. Business did not outbid subprime homeowners prior to the financial crisis. And those savings are now flowing in to fiscal deficits, which largely increase consumption. So we are avoiding this problem of the factory shutting down if we don't put the excess savings to work. But we've done that to ourselves. It's largely coming from offshore. And we're solving the rest of the world's problem for them by allowing the rest of the world to run up big trade surpluses with us. I write about that in my first book and what caused the financial crisis, but we're getting off a little bit off topic. But you can't avoid a negative. You can't create a positive. I hope that helped.
Okay, Bernard Trout and then Peter Hansen, please.
Hey,
I'll go as long as anybody wants to go, by the way. It's not like, you guys won't want to go. I'll go longer than you'll want to go. Let's put it.
No, we will, but yeah, we'll keep you on.
We're going to try to keep up with you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for your very interesting summary and discussion. I have a question though. You mentioned a bit about the low wage workers and in particular the white working class who seems to be on serious decline. You mentioned a little bit about the political ramifications of that. You said that you would want to figure out a way to solve that. I didn't quite understand, however, what you had in mind, because it seems like all the policies really that you were advocating will lead to continued decline, including offshore more of the low-skilled jobs. In addition to that, bringing in 20 million high-skilled, let's say wage earners. Yeah, maybe the rising tide lifts all boats, but nevertheless, it seems to me the societal implications are that this decline is going to continue. The inequality in that sense will continue. That's the main question, and there are just two other aspects to that. One is United States security broadly, not just military. I think 80% plus of our pharmaceutical precursors are from China and elsewhere. We saw some of the ramifications of that. Microchips, much more than that. And then B is I guess that's B is the issue that the 5 to 20 million high-skilled immigrants are coming here for the technological and economic opportunities, but they don't think much necessarily of American constitutional government beyond those. And there's no indication that they will, or I mean, they might for economic reasons, but not for internal reasons. They don't feel the American Constitution is something special. So those were just two aspects, but the main question is really what you would specifically advocate for helping these white working class, and I guess it doesn't have to be just white, but
Yeah.
So
yes, it's a big question. I hope I can remember all aspects of it. One of the things that concerns me is when you have 4 times as many high skilled per low skilled in Scandinavia, for example, it's like 2.5 to 3 times as many in Germany. Okay, we have about 28% of our population is low scoring on OECD tests. And I think about 12%, I think it's 8% are high scoring. If you looked at Germany, for example, I think it's 12% high scoring, 18% low scoring. If you want to see a country that's ripe for socialism, it's America. It's amazing that America isn't the country that became socialism. It's the country with the high scores in Europe that became socialist, and the country with the low scores in America stayed capitalist. I'm worried about, you want to see where socialism's coming next? It's coming here, is what I believe. Now, there are 2 ways we might solve that. One way is we reduce inequality. But if we reduce inequality and slow the growth rate, because the second way is increase the growth rate. Increase the amount of wages, which I'm trying to do by changing the ratio of high skill to low skill and putting more pressure on the low skill wages. So I may end up with more inequality and faster growth. Does that reduce the chances of socialism more than less inequality and slower growth? I don't know. I sure do like the idea of being able to say, let's compare us to America in truly honest and careful ways. And we are producing 30% more income for you guys than our European counterparts are. Oh, by the way, they have way more, twice as many high-skilled people as we do, and they still can't deliver it. And oh, by the way, they still can't deliver it, even though we're giving them we're protecting them militarily, we're giving them all of our innovation, and we're putting all the profits into healthcare that's producing all the healthcare innovation. And they're still not doing it. So do I like my chances better on one versus the other? Yeah. Could somebody come out the other door? Clearly they could. I recognize the problem of cultural differences. It's a real problem. I'd like to think that, and maybe if you say, let's crank it up to 20 million, you have a bigger problem of the kind that you're describing. That's why I would probably keep it closer to 5 million. My inclination would be to say, I want Americans to support it, which is why I want to push it to the extremes, the top 5%, and not talk about the top 20 or the top 30. I think when you push it up to those levels, I'm going to say maybe something that's wishful thinking and naive. I think the values are more universal. The more elite you make the group. And I also think the more likely you are to support, capitalism and freedom because you are the beneficiary of capital and freedom. I'd like to think that we could sort through the pile and say, to the extent we're bringing Chinese people in, we're worried about they might steal our technology, that somehow we might be able to vet them or say, let's be careful about how many Chinese people we bring in. I don't really quite know how to do that, and it sure would be nice to say, hey, let's give you some tests and see how close you are to the values that we have in our Constitution. Although I think we have plenty of people in America who don't think John Locke got it right. People who, I don't think the socialists think John Locke got it right. So what America's values are, I'm not 100% sure. I know what my values are, but they're kind of self-serving because sure, I want freedom and and I'm a great beneficiary of it. But my sense is we keep the number low, we keep the number quite high skilled. I'd also say, look, what we've done extremely well relative to the rest of the world is produce MBAs and lawyers and salesmen and people who are connected into the network of America, that where we would benefit most would be bringing in the technical skills, because a lot of our high scores have moved from the technical fields to more of the communications fields, if you will, or the integration or the networking fields, like being the business leader as opposed to actually doing the math. And so I don't know, my sense is, if you look at universities, the science departments are less political. They might even be more conservative, quite frankly, but.
I can tell you that is not the case at all.
Okay, I don't know.
'Cause I'm there. It's maybe less, but it's like.
But I guess if there was a risk I was willing to take, I think this is the risk I would take. Because I do think the alternative is going to be growth crushing tax increases, slow growth, an emerging China, which looks mighty scary. And how are we going to pull the world to our side? What is it that we're going to present to the world that says, oh, in this battle where it's life or death, I'm not saying it will be life or death, but if it is, why are they going to join our team? What are we going to offer them? Now, we've offered them a lot so far. We've enjoyed, we've enjoyed being the dominant force, but 50 years from now, we have to do a lot of work, I think, if we want to stay in the fight. And I don't see another path. So these are the risks I would take. But I think you're raising a lot of the concerns that this path creates. They're important considerations. I don't see just saying, okay, let's not go down this path because of those concerns. What does that look like? That's a pretty scary path too. And along the way, by the way, I would say at some point you have to say, we're going to put tariffs on China and we're going to push that production to other places. We don't trade with the Russians. Why are we trading with the Chinese? And don't we want, if you want to weaken China, what you want is the rest of Southeast Asia to grow stronger. So what you want to do is take your production and move it from China to Southeast Asia. And you can say all you want to companies, hey, you got to move it. You put tariffs on, they'll move it. You don't put tariffs on, they'll do whatever they want. They'll do whatever in their best interest. And, China's the guy with the surplus savings. So it's easiest to put the stuff in China. You can run a big trade deficit. You don't have to worry about the currency changing, because they'll hold enough American debt to make sure that the currency ratios don't change. Makes it a lot easier to put your production in China. You gotta put a tariff on if you want to take that advantage away. And now you're going to be in countries that don't have excess savings, and you're going to have balanced trade with those countries, but they're going to have a lot of U.S. production and they're going to be a lot stronger. I think that's beneficial to us relative to China, and not because they aren't necessarily going to join China, but only because China's big. It's 1 billion people. It's going to be a force to contend with. I'd rather have to contend with a fragmented Southeast Asia than one big powerhouse. Is going to do everything in its power, by the way, to consolidate Southeast Asia in the long run, I think, unless somehow they turn out to be Japan and we all live happily ever after. Amen. But, that wouldn't be I'd have a contingency plan is what I'm saying.
Okay, we have Harvey, then Paul Peterson, and then Peter Hansen. We'll get to all of you.
Just building on the last question from Bernard Trout on culture. Now, in your remarks, you took a swipe at Bowling Alone and Coming Apart. That is Robert Putnam and Charles Murray. These are people of high skill.
Yes.
Yes, right. And what is the fundamental driving force that your argument relies on? Isn't it something cultural as opposed to economic? Because it seems that America, stupid as we are, and with lousy education on top of that, we're much more productive. Mustn't there be some difference in the way we think and our willingness to take risk that would not be explained by purely economic reasons, but cultural? Because wouldn't the economic reasons apply equally everywhere if culture didn't matter?
So I don't believe so. Maybe it's self-serving. Okay. I believe being an economist, things look economic to me. Okay. So I believe that we have very different payoffs and what I'll call expected values. That's the probability of success times the value of success. We have very different, much higher probabilities of success because our people are trained working at Google. They see lots of problems. They say, oh, there's a good idea. Google's not doing it, or I'm going to steal it and take it across the street. They bring it to the venture capital community. They say, no, no, no. Oh, here's a great idea. We'll finance it. That increases the probability of success. We know how to do startups. We can get a team. We can assemble a team. That increases your chances of success. And oh, by the way, your ideas are way better because if you're sitting in a cafe in Greece thinking of a good idea, your idea is going to be how to make the coffee beans better, not how do you solve a cybersecurity problem related to Google that's common to the military and all corporations. So the problems you're working on, the value of solving those problems and the likelihood of success multiply together to increase the expected value. No surprise, we're taking all the risks. Okay. And oh, by the way, no surprise, go bring a really talented immigrant over here. Go take a look at Silicon Valley. They're taking all the risks. Okay. It's not like the Americans, or it's not like the American, blood that's causing all the risk. Anybody you put there is taking the risk. Any talented person you put there is taking the risk. So I don't think it's as cultural. I think it's more economic. And I also believe that culture is a byproduct of the economics. So I think of this in the way of who's working really hard in school. The valedictorians. Why? Because a small amount of work is going to create a great amount of differentiation, right? You goof off, you're valid. If you've got the capability to be a valedictorian, you work hard, you get to go to Harvard, okay? If you're an average person, you work hard, you're average. So you go, I'm willing to work hard, but not like the valedictorian because they're getting a huge payoff for what they're doing. I'm not getting that payoff. So I often think that culture is a byproduct. I think where I think we're failing in America culture-wise is we're not inculcating our talented people and saying, you know what, you're on the team. It is a team. You're the leader of the team. We need a lot more from you. Blah, blah, blah. You got to put people to work. You got to get the training. You got to do the arduous work. Get the tedious training. Take the risks. You have a moral responsibility. You are the lucky recipient of talent, but that talent belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. Yeah, it belongs to you. I don't want to get in debate about who it belongs to, but it comes with moral responsibilities to the rest of us. And I don't think we're inculcating our talent that way. And then on top of it, we're going to everybody else and we're dividing them. We're saying, America's, I'm dangerous now because I'm talking to the government school and, you guys are all going to kill me for saying this, but you need the heroic narrative that unites everybody, that says we're a moral country and we're trying to make it all better for everybody. And, yeah, we have original sin, but you can't really absolve us of our original sin. We kind of have to do it ourselves. And the way we really do it is by serving our fellow man as customers, by and large, not with our good intentions. And I feel that on one side, we're not getting the talent motivated and feeling the moral responsibility, but on the other side, we're dividing everybody against the status quo. We're dividing them against the leaders. We're saying the leaders are immoral. The status quo is immoral. You should fight the status quo. And it's just going to lead to a terrible, I believe, fragmentation of America, a terrible fragmentation of the team. And if you go back to like the 1940s and the 1950s, people are thinking exactly the opposite. Like, we're the heroic, we need to save the world. We're all in this together. We need the leaders, we need the workers. And we were fortunate in the manufacturing that we all shared quasi-equally in the success. I tried to lay out the economics, which says it's not going to work like it worked in the 1950s and 60s because the structure of the opportunities is different. And so we have to adjust the inculcation of people to fit the underlying economics. So I didn't mean to diss, by the way, bowling alone and coming apart. What I was saying was they've identified a very important phenomena. They just haven't identified the underlying economic reasons that are causing it, because they're not economists, they're sociologists, and damn fine ones too. And those two books are two of the most important books for us to read, because they really do lay out a critical problem. But, unfortunately, I could go on, it's like democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, but why is democracy so bad? And that's because we're depending on our political leaders to do nothing to get reelected. And what do they do to get reelected? They play to our basis. They'll do we have to depend on them to do anything to get elected. But the stuff they do to get elected rips us apart. It's terrible. I mean, anyway, I don't know if that answered or not, but it scares the heck out of me what I see.
Okay, you're great, Ed. Here comes Paul Peterson. Fist fight.
So I just wanted to share with you all some Flynn effects. I've been studying the trends in student achievement over the past 50 years, as revealed by all the different agencies out there that have tracked it over time and brought it all together into one database. And what we're finding is that we're seeing a lot of, am I coming through all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah. So we're finding a Flynn effect. Now, the Flynn effect says that you get an increase of about 3 IQ points every decade over 50 years. That's 15, which is astounding. It's sort of unbelievable that IQ could increase by a full standard deviation over the course of 50 years, given the fact that we think it's genetically determined. So a lot of people have been doing work on the Flynn effect since then, and worldwide, they're finding that, in fact, there is a Flynn effect in lots of databases out there, but it's primarily in what they call fluid reasoning, which is analytical skills, stuff that's really good in Silicon Valley. Analytical skills have improved by a full standard deviation over the last 50 years. But crystallized knowledge, that is the knowledge of the real world out there, understanding of the world, that has not improved by very much, by maybe as much as 15% of a standard deviation, about 1/10 or a little better, as much as fluid reasoning. Now, if you translate that into what's being tested in these tests that have been administered by the OECD, the PISA test, that's distinguishing between analytic knowledge and which is math, and crystallized knowledge, which could be associated with reading. We're finding exactly the same thing in these two subjects. We find that over the past 50 years in the United States, student performance in math has improved by a full standard deviation, an astounding improvement that nobody talks about. But the improvement in reading has been very modest by, maybe as 0.15 standard deviations, just, a tenth, maybe a little bit more, as much. So why is that? And we're suggesting that it's probably being driven by the Flynn effect, that the Flynn effect is really enhancing the brain power of the average person in the world, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. And it's probably doing so because of improved nutrition, which I think you mentioned, but also reduction in contagious diseases, reduction in environmental risks, air pollution, lead poisoning, all kinds of things that can affect the formation of the brain in the very early moments of life, maybe even prior to birth or right at the time of birth when the brain is most malleable. So we have what is generally misunderstood. People talk about there's been no improvement in our education, but in fact, there's been a huge improvement in people's mathematical skills, though not much in their reading skills. And so how to sort that out? By the way, it shows up very early. It shows up at age 9. And the first tests that are administered, you see these huge gains. They don't increase as they go through school.
Right.
And in fact, you see as big gains for the bottom of the distribution as at the top of the distribution, no more. You're not finding the most talented people learning a lot more. In fact, for reading, the biggest gains are those at the bottom of the distribution, and for minority groups, not white people, and for low SES groups, not high SES groups. Now, the one qualification of that is you see attenuation as they go through school, that the highest performing, the people from the highest income groups or socioeconomic groups, by the time they finish high school, they've sort of made up what they've lost when they arrive at age 9 and maybe are a little bit ahead. So there seems to be some effects there that look like, okay, people who are the valedictorians are actually working harder and so forth. But basically the story over the past 50 years is that the bottom of the distribution, both defined ethnically and in terms of socioeconomic status, has actually been making the most gains in both math and reading. But the biggest finding here is that there's tremendous differences in the growth in analytic capacities as compared to knowledge of the real world. So those are just some findings that I wanted to share to see how they fit in with your thinking on education.
Well, my sense is it's not education, it's something else. Because as you point out, it's largely occurring before education, and we're not changing the relatives as much as you might hope we are. So, I don't know what. Well,
that's sort of focusing solely in on the fluid reasoning side. So that's true for analytic skills. We do see some progress in crystallized knowledge, but it's very, very
small.
Slow. Yeah.
And I don't know. One thing I think we do know, and this I think makes it a little complicated, is it seems to be easier to learn math than it is to learn reading in general. So what we see in charter schools too, by the way, is I think, and you're going to be more closer to the data than I am, is that we can teach the young children math skills more easily than we can teach them reading skills. It's been very hard to keep the effects by the time they get to the 12th grade. So it's possible that in a world where you're more challenged mathematically, as long as that continues on day in and day out, you may end up, it may be that you're not getting smarter, you're just using your brain more effectively, if you will. I'm not sure there's a difference, quite frankly, but
but then why does it show up immediately at age 9 even more powerfully than later on?
A lot of it's I think you're right, it's poison and nutrition, and and I do think I am a little bit, I sit on the board of a company that is in the whole, it's in pharmaceutical research. We make instruments that are used by pharmaceutical researchers. People were very optimistic about genetics, genomics, and immediately discovered all the proteomics matter every bit as much as the genomics matter, what the genes are bathed in, the proteins that the genes are bathed in. And that led to another whole, whatever it would be, sugars, where the sugars affect the proteins and the proteins affect the genes. And it's complicated too, because what's in your stomach in some ways competing to get in your stomach. There's a lot of, there's just a lot of feedback with the environment that I think is changing the way people think about evolution and the rate at which it can go. It's complicated stuff. I'm all for trying to crack the code and, figuring out what it is and harnessing it and putting it to work. That doesn't mean, I don't know that it's an argument for spending more money on education. I'm not saying we should spend more or less. I'm saying, I don't think we know in education where we're spending our money. I don't know, we know that if we saturate an uneducated population with education, it'll get more productive. And we know that if, like in the case of No Child Left Behind, if we measure everybody and we find out the guys who are neglecting, whether it's their school district or certain people in their school district, and we certainly found a lot of the latter, and we kick their butts, they'll bring everybody up to the average, up to the compositional average. So we can get one-time improvements, and we can put pressure on people to stop neglecting and get up to the average. Once we've gotten to there, education-wise, not Flynn Effect-wise, we haven't had as much success. The little bit of success we do see in charter schools, largely in math, we're able to do it as long as we keep the kids under pressure. But as they get older, it's hard to maintain the gains that we're able to get, like 4th, 5th grade. I think we can get them largely through the 6th grade, keep increasing. And then from that point on, they're decreasing. So I don't know, I never know how to take what we've learned from the Flynn effect, or still are trying to figure out.
Well, we actually see for African-American students larger gains than for white students over the past 50 years. Has it been a fairly steady change over time? I don't disagree with you on the charter schools, but I think we are underestimating the amount of improvement that we have been making. A very slow, steady improvements. The group that is actually doing the least well, if you track over time, is the white population, and especially the high SES groups. You don't see much improvement for high SES groups.
Right.
Of course, you see improvement in math for everybody, but so the question is, why aren't we seeing a more improvement at the high end?
I mean, what I think is I believe we had a lot of neglect, and we're out there finding the neglect, kicking people's butts and telling them to get their, get it fixed. So, there's no neglect on the high SES guys. They're all got tutors and private education, and, they're kicking the butts on their administrators in their school districts. And, I think, dare I say this, we found plenty of school districts that probably skewed towards the South, which weren't giving it the old college try. And, that got revealed a little bit with No Child Left Behind. We did see a spurt up at that point, even though we've seen a gradual upward tick where you said, hey, you got to deliver the same amount to everybody. You don't get to neglect one group relative to the other. And we got some improvements. We did get improvements from that. Is it improvements from stopping the neglect, or is it improvements from pushing the frontier forward? Very hard to push the frontier forward.
Okay, Peter Hansen and then Patrick Dowdle, keep it short. We're not going to constrain talent artificially here by cutting off Ed Conard, so we're going to keep going.
Having just been called talent, I got to live up to that. My question's a change of pace. Interested in talking a little about MBAs. Last time you were here, I think, and certainly with Bill Crystal, and the talks with him, you've talked about synergy in the US, an advantage that we have being synergy between MBAs and engineers. And I used to work in finance, and I've always tended to be an MBA skeptic. So I'm interested in hearing a little more about that. Today, you quoted Andy Grove, and great engineer who was CEO of Intel, of course, in the 90s, a company that is now, as I understand it, run by MBAs and has gone kind of not been doing as well, shall we say, since that transition. So I'm really just curious to hear more about the synergy, what MBAs bring to the table, why are companies not better off with engineers and just entrepreneurs who didn't get MBAs?
Well, I don't know that I know the definitive answer. I'll give you a few things that cross my mind. The first is, Japan has about 7 times as many high score per low scores as we have. Okay, and their high scores are predominantly engineers, and they don't get anywhere near the productivity growth and innovation that we get. Okay, a little bit weird, and it's also the case that Northern Europe, which is Germany's about 2.5 to 3 times, and Scandinavia is about 4 times on the measure I just gave you. They are also skewed towards engineers, and they also don't get the innovativeness and productivity gain. The place where we see it is in the United States, where we have more of a mix. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would tell you is people go into professions for a reason, presumably people are kind of quasi paid for their contribution. I'm not saying the R squared is 100%. It's all of the math, of course, but somehow students come along and they say, should I be an engineer or should I be an MBA? And when they look at their career prospects, they end up deciding, oh, I'd rather be an MBA, I'd rather be a lawyer than a scientist. And if you go back in time and looked at, SAT scores and who went where, there is a shift, especially among domestic students, from engineering into some of these other more networking oriented, less scientific, less mathematically oriented. Although I would contend to you that because of personal computers and because of the data explosion, MBAs became a much more mathematically oriented profession. And the people who are succeeding in it with MBAs are, in many cases, more mathematically oriented. And it's part of why we've seen the explosion of finance. We've seen the explosion of management consultants, like paralleling personal computers. But my point being, in the Darwinian survival of the fittest, people went to school and said, where can I get the most money? And if money is somehow correlated to the value they're going to add, somehow they made the decision of switching from the sciences. But I'd tell you my own personal experiences. I was an engineer. I worked at Ford Motor Company, and I went back to business school with every intent of returning back to Ford Motor Company. And, when I saw the world, I did not go back to Ford Motor Company. And so from my own personal experience, not being an engineer turned out to be it's a distorted point of view, of course, and it's a data point of one, but I'm relating it back to the fact that many other people made the same career choice along the way who had high test scores and were thoughtful about it. So I don't know. But I mainly look at the success of the United States relative to these other economies that are more engineering oriented. And it just seems that the mix that we have has just caused us to be better. And I'd say one more thing too, which is people talk about short-termism. But if you really look at where the R&D expenditures are and the capital expenditures and the information investment and investment in information technology and in intangibles, which are things like training or advertising, things that are not so the physical, it's the big companies are that's outpacing the rest of the economy on those things. So it's a little bit weird to go, oh, there's short-termism and everybody cares about the quarter, but oh, by the way, it's the public companies who are investing more in capital and R&D and training and all of the things. That's where the MBAs are, okay? But they're everywhere, but you go, is there really short-termism if that's where I find increases in investment? I don't know, those would be the things that are on my mind, but mainly it's the success of America and the mix that we have and how it's changed over time and how our success is pulled away from the rest of the world. In part, don't forget, they were catching up to us after World War II because they were destroyed. They caught up to us, but we should have all moved together and then we pulled away. That happens in the mid-1990s with information.
I got one mischievous quick follow-up, and then I'll let you go, which is if we say whatever America is doing must be right, we have a lot of MBAs, that must be the right way to go. Well, wouldn't that apply to lawyers? Also, having lots of lawyers must be part of the secret sauce. And I'm guessing that's probably not your view, but I'll let it go.
It's a touche is what I would say. But you got to believe that we're slowing ourselves down with all the litigation. On the other hand, a lot of that, there is a flip side to regulation. Is part of the reason people want to put it in is because they see bad things happening without it and they're trying to correct the bad things. So, we are getting good and we are getting bad. Is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back? I don't know. But touche. I don't think we're going to answer this question definitively.
Okay, we have Patrick Dowdell, Eileen McDonough, Avi Nelson, Andy Zwick.
In that order or all at the same time?
All at the same time. Go. Patrick Dowdell, or maybe he left. Okay, so Eileen McDonough.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thanks for this presentation. It was just really great. I have a question about your heroic narrative and the need for one in our country. And I will accept the idea that you presented that, economy is the foundation of cultural premises or principles. But I have a question about the fact that cultural legacies can continue even after the fact they've been generated or constructed by economic context. And in particular, I'm curious about how you would evaluate the cultural legacy of the American Revolution in the context of your interest and concern about how in this country we develop a principle of talent is responsible to other people, it's moral responsibility. We need to view not just ourselves as individuals, but also the sort of community or corporate whole. And the reason the American Revolution comes to mind is because, let's say it was generated by economic principles, we'll just accept that, but it did, I mean, for sake of argument, but it did generate a heroic narrative that I believe has a continuing impact on the way we think about things today, which is that it's the supremacy of the individual and the rights of individuals that are the fundamental goal of society and of government in terms of what to protect. And also that there is some sort of romanticizing of rebellion, if not revolution, that this is a really good thing that the United States did. And that therefore rebellion rather than cooperation is a norm that I believe has continued to have impact even today. And that, of course, together as a third thing, the individual rebellion. The third thing is, of course, the suspicion that any government is maybe too much. And that can be seen on the right in the sense of a Tea Party position that the government should only do the roads and the military. But it's also now evident on the left, if you want to call it that, in that the solution to, let's say at least, racial problems or tensions in the United States is to defund the police or to make government more limited. Now, given that heritage, which by the way, I won't go into this, but I'll stop right there. Given that heritage, which I think is still with us today and very prominent in both the left and the right, where would we ever get, assuming the economic foundation is required, but what economic foundation would we need or have to get a view of society and the government as a cooperative entity, both cooperative between people, but also cooperative between the state and people?
I don't know. So let's see.
That's okay. I was just curious whether you would have any sort of reaction.
I'll try to answer your question in a different way. Okay. And I don't know that I'm going to give you a satisfactory answer.
Any answers? Okay.
All right. And I'm scared to death to give this answer to the faculty of the government school that can just tear me to shreds here for my lack of knowledge, and I'm way out of my.
No one is going to do that. No one's going to do that.
Okay. I mean, I'm way out of my area of understanding. Here's mine. I often, it's the democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, right? What is the problem with all the other ones? We have to depend on the powers that be to make decisions, and we can end up with Hitler and a lot of bad stuff. So we end up defaulting to the very fatal flaw of democracy, which is we have to let the majority decide. And they're not very educated, and they want to consume everything. They're not very interested in investment. They don't really understand the future. They're not doing careful calculations. But you know what? That's more reliable than the alternative. And I view an awful lot of what happened in the Constitution as being a lot of wise founders saying that what we have to depend on is a very dangerous force. And therefore, what are all the checks and balances and things that we can do to rein that dangerous force in? So, it's the Bill of Rights, it's all of the checks and balances across all of our systems. I mean, they went so far as to go only, taxpayer landowners can vote. They didn't even see women as contributing, so they can't vote. Let's restrict who's voting. Because this tension is, and as I said, I don't think I'm answering your question, but this is a tension between consumption and investment, and they recognize that the fatal flaw of democracy was what the locusts would consume everything, and they tried to do everything they could to push back in the other direction, to give the small minority of investors as much of a chance to succeed as they possibly could. And I think they were very understanding, in my opinion, of economics. And so, for me, how much we invest and how much we consume, it is not clear what optimal is. We don't want to be 100% investment, obviously, and consume nothing. We don't want to be 100% consumption. Where optimal lies is a very complicated thing. And you want great push and pull between investors and consumers, recognizing that consumers, voting-wise, outnumber investors by 100 to 1. It's a small group of people that are going to own all the wealth, own all the investment, make all the investments, take all the risks, underwrite all the risks. Okay, and so I think what I find on the two sides is that, I'm on the right, so I'll criticize the left first, but the right's every bit as responsible. Okay, they go, hey, let's open up the voting. Let's make, let's have mail-in ballots. Let's encourage everybody to sign up. That's the democratic principle. It's a good thing. It can't possibly be a bad thing. It's true, but it also increases the pressure for more consumption and less investment. And then you say, on the right, hey, let's let more money into politics because the rich guys got the money and they're going to be more pro-investment and whatever the case may be. And, we want to push back in the other way. And I don't think either side is very respectful of the importance of the other side. And I don't think either side thinks, hey, where is optimal? They just go push in my direction. More is, more no matter how much more. There is no, and I don't think we can depend on the political leaders, because the only thing we can ask the political leaders to do is to get elected. That's what we depend on them to do. But getting elected leads to bad stuff because the voters don't understand. It's got to be the intellectuals. It's got to be the, it's got to be a debate among the intellectuals. It's got to be a communication to the rest of the world. And it's primarily a communication, in my perspective, from the intellectuals to the media, from the media to the rest of the world. Now, when you go from the media to the rest of the world, it gets pretty complicated and pretty political. But I'd only tell you this, having read, Sandel's book after the last time I was there, I feel like the intellectuals have a moral responsibility to tell the truth. And I go to the Schumpeter quote, which is, show me a guy with ideals and I'll show you a guy who will lie for his ideals. And so, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but for me, we have a moral responsibility to tell our truths and really not propagandize them, not present things out of content, not present half-truths, to really explain both sides of the argument, to really to take it upon ourselves to respect the other side of the argument in the way that the founders of our Constitution respected it, and to really try to communicate to the public as best we can and to the media what those trade-offs are and what our founders were trying to do. And look, I understand why, rich guys want Lockean philosophy with private property and a whole bunch of freedom. And, and I'm not a libertarian, as I said, we need plenty of government. Do we need more than 40% of GDP on government? I don't think so, but, because I don't see it as very efficient. So I think 50% is going to make us less efficient, not more. It's going to lead to more consumption, not less. I believe, investment's probably we're probably have too little investment and could use a little bit more, but I don't want the forces I don't want one side to unconstrain the other side. That's going to be a disaster, whichever side gets control. But I didn't answer your question. It's way over my head. I gave you the best answer I could.
Thanks, that was great. Thanks.
And I probably butchered every concept in political philosophy. For the little inkling that Harvey has taught me, okay. A year ago, I didn't even understand this. So, and I'm
Stop it with the false modesty. Now we have Avi Nelson and then Andy Zwick.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. You spoke earlier that about, in effect, that the lower income or the middle income, blue collar people aren't doing as well as the upper income. And I wondered if you really see manifestations of this resentment. You did not mention it, But the other side on the left, one of their favorite current issues is wealth redistribution. That the wealth, that there are people who are too wealthy, they never specify exactly how this would work, but they're using in effect as a political club. I have not sensed any of that resentment of people who are wealthier than they from, say, the blue collar world. You made a passing reference to Trump, but my sense is that a lot of the support that Trump got was a reaction against political correctness and the trope that's being offered now by the left, especially say on the college campus, the denigration of America, this business that somehow everybody except white men deserve some kind of special consideration. So I guess the question is, do you have any support at all for a concept such as redistribution? And more importantly, is there really a problem here in the less than wealthy people being resentful of this gap and increasing gap that you pointed out exists in the country and in the direction of travel?
So I'm not sure is the answer. I mean, it's hard to know how much resentment is out there. It's not hard for me to fathom that there might be resentment given the success of the most successful people and who my view is of who has shared what portion of the gains. I think proportionally, it's the working class, domestic working class person who shared least in the gain. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're, my interpretation of Trump, by the way, is that, and I'll come back and sort of agree with you here, but that he's really underneath it is three messages. One message is, I'm going to create a shortage of low-skilled labor to drive up your wages. Okay, I'm going to reduce trade with low-wage economies. I'm going to reduce low-skilled immigration. So I'm going to do those things in order to drive up low-skilled wages. And I think the person who becomes don't everybody jump on me, I'll say this, I'm biased in my point of view. The blue-collar person who becomes a Republican is a person who wants a wage increase and is against a handout. Now, they'll take a handout too, in Social Security, which I'll come to in a second in many other ways, but they view themselves as being anti-handout, pro-increased wage. I want to work. Handouts hurt my families. They hurt my communities. They hurt my children. I don't really want a handout. I just want a higher wage. And the way I'm going to get a higher wage as a low-skilled worker is quit increasing the supply of low-skilled labor when there's so much automation, and then you're going to have trade, and then you're going to have low-skilled immigration. Come on, you hit me with a triple banger there. Give me a break. I think that, by the way, I think is his number one core message. I think his second message is, I'm going to make your Social Security a priority. The Republicans want to cut taxes. It's true the Republicans cut taxes, but he really ran on a platform of, hey, I might raise taxes on the rich guys, and in lives, my taxes went up in the Republican tax cut because I live in New York. So it's not like I got a tax cut, probably got it through the corporate tax cut, different issues. CBO says that's going to pay for it. That piece of it pays for itself. The very thing we're unwinding. But he is saying, look, here's what the Democrats' priorities are. First of all, by the way, look, on the first point, they're never going to reconcile with the Democrats because the people who are joining Trump, because they say, look, you guys want to keep the borders open on the South for other reasons. You might want to win Arizona. You might want to win Texas. You might think it's the morally right thing to do, but it increases the supply of low-skilled labor and it hurts my wages. So there's always going to be a divide there. Second, on Social Security, hey, you want to spend the money on the Democrat side helping the poor. You Republicans want to cut taxes. Where's the priority for me? What I want is faster growth, higher wages, pay my Social Security. That's a big chunk of where my future income is coming from. And he's the only guy who really basically said that's a priority. And then the third point to your point is, make this a better world for my children, is all of the identity politics. Maybe it's anti-white racism, and it's, if I say it in the worst possible way, whatever it is, they're saying that's not helping my children succeed. And guys like Mitt Romney don't have the courage to push back because you rich guys have too much to lose. And therefore, you're perfectly willing to stay quiet and enjoy your success because you don't want to put your success at risk by pushing back on this stuff. And this crazy guy, he's willing to push back and he doesn't really care. Call him a racist. He actually seems to like it in some ways. Okay. So that'll be doing, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just, it's us observing his self-destructive behavior in many cases where we all go like, what in the world? Why in the world are you sticking your foot in your mouth? I mean, what's the point? But, I grew up in Detroit and I worked for Ford, and a lot of my friends are blue collar workers. And I went to a high school with 750 kids. So 20% of them went to college. So my friends are all blue collar workers in the auto industry. They say, look at Ed, when Donald Trump says something stupid, you cringe. And I say, that's my guy. That's me. He acts like me. He thinks like me. I'm cheering him when he pushes back. And your guy, Mitt Romney, he's a corporate chieftain. I'm a blue collar worker. I'm not for the corporate chieftain. I'm for the fighter who's going to fight back. I want the brass buckled bully who's going to punch you guys in the nose. I hear their resentment, but their resentment isn't so much like you didn't deserve the money you got. It's more like you don't have the courage to fight. And, I didn't share proportionally in what happened. Most of my friends, my best friend from high school, best man at my wedding, $35 an hour working in the auto industry, is making $15 an hour fixing the sewers for the municipal sewer system now, because his dad and he owned a machine shop. The jobs went to North Carolina, and from North Carolina, they went to Mexico. They were able to ship it to North Carolina. They can't ship it to Mexico and succeed. You tell him trade doesn't affect his job, his wage. He thinks you're pulling his leg. He's like, what are you talking about? Of course trade affects my wage. My wage went from $35 an hour to $15. And you know what? All he wants is $16 an hour. He's not even thinking politics, but what he is thinking is Donald Trump is my man. Donald Trump's going to push you. And keep in mind what happened here. It was the Democratic Party that was the blue collar party. And Trump, it's the blue collar forces that put Trump into power in the Republican Party. And I also believe, by the way, that, the financial crisis weakened the corporate chieftains, the Mitt Romneys of the world, in terms of their credibility. And it did sort of open the door for a renegade Republican, not of the corporate chieftain mode. And that made it a lot easier for the blue collar Republican supporter to support Republicans, because it's going to be hard for them to support Mitt Romney, CEO. What's he want? He wants to cut jobs and lower wages and increase profits and make everything more efficient. That's not what my friends want. They just want a higher wage, and they don't want, a low-skilled immigrant competing with them for their job, busting the rate. They're like, hey, get off my butt and let me take a longer coffee break. What are you doing? So I don't know. That's the dynamic I see floating around. And it's strong enough to, on the one side, power Donald Trump to power in the Republican Party. And I think it's on the left, it has its own manifestation, a rise of socialism and an attack on wealth and more redistribution and increased government spending and borrowing money, all the things it's leading to. But those seem to me to be two symptoms of the same underlying, they manifest themselves in very different ways depending on what your set of beliefs are. But what the energy is that's powering them both, I see them as kind of the same myself. But doesn't mean I've got it. These are complicated issues. I'm blathering away. I mean, sorry.
It's great blabber. We still have a lot of people hanging around, Ed. So Andy, please.
Always good to see you, Ed, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. More important.
My question is about technology and how that affects your topic of properly trained talent, especially as it pertains to lower skilled workers in America. When we think about the more traditional way of training workers with standard operating procedures and so on, how do we think about the introduction of technology like whether it's Uber Eats or Amazon or software that allows individuals who are lower skilled to learn quickly how to do something that serves a function, particularly in an era like the one we've been living through, where we're more dependent on services like those. How do you see that as playing out in the years ahead? How do you think about it now with respect to your overall analysis of the economy, the growth of technology in areas like this?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, but I do have some thoughts in this area. I've owned a lot of businesses, from pretty high skill to to pretty I was in the manufacturing. What I did was industrial investments for Bain Capital. We owned a lot of warehouses. Some of them picked T-shirts, some of them picked paper products, paper towels to paper, whatever. Pretty low skilled stuff. I think a lot of people don't understand what that working environment looks like. So T-shirt picking, I'd say our average turnover rate's 3 months, 6 months, as long as a person lasts in the job, then they quit and they go find another job. Constant turnover. You stay there for a year, you're probably the foreman. Okay. A lot of people coming in hungover the next morning, lots of picking errors in the morning. We would test people until 10 a.m. If you had a certain number of errors at 10 a.m., we got to send you home because we're going to have a lot of unhappy customers. A lot of immigrants, a lot of them can't speak English. We got to have, Spanish speaking supervisors to interact with them. It's not, the question would be like, how much learning, and oh, by the way, I think, economics would say most of your learning is on the job, not in school. And so you need to be on a job for a long period of time to really get the training that's related to that job. And so a lot of what we were doing in these warehouses is, trying to create a job that didn't require much training. We got a training program that could get you up to speed in a matter of days, because by 6 months, it's a pretty good chance you've gone off to another very similar job, by the way. It's bad for the kids too, because they're moving to another house and the kids moving to another school district. And there's a lot more turnover down there than you probably fathom. And, the kinds of things that I have a friend who builds Amazon warehouses. Cameras focused on workers to make sure that if they pick the wrong product, it says, "Oh, not that Crest toothpaste," the bottle next to it. It's endless amounts of technology trying to prevent picking errors, trying to make that worker as productive as they can possibly be with very little training and capability. It's not a pretty picture. So where do I see technology really making a difference? Sadly, and probably helpful to people is we can do a lot of quality control that makes you a far more effective worker. We can do a lot of training, we can create a job pretty simply that doesn't require much training and can allow for the kind of turnover that we're likely to see no matter how much effort we try to make to reduce it. When you look at companies for me like Uber and Walmart, okay, these are companies that have cracked the code on how to get a lot of supervision through software and not through humans. Because you go, look, I have really talented, capable humans.
Let me just interrupt for a second, because I think you understand my question and you've presented the glass half empty answer.
Well, I don't, hopefully, yeah, go ahead.
I want to take it up, let's just say one level, to software, let's say, in training programs, let's say for nursing or becoming a medical assistant. Isn't there an opportunity through technology, both in the sense that you're describing of increasing quality control, something, I use the example of Uber Eats because I have to imagine that that software allows a driver in a short period of time to learn how to do that job.
Yeah.
They're really not capable of doing it. They're not going to stay on the platform. So the software is serving a function in terms of making the lower skilled worker able to do something important in the economy.
Yeah.
As I said, as we move, higher and in terms of, as you're describing it, in terms of the natural ability of the worker and the economy, aren't there ways in which technology can improve both the contribution and the lives of the individuals through better technology in the years ahead? That would be my glass half full. So, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Look, I don't know. These are complicated questions, and I'm trying to answer them as best I can. And I'm trying to do a divide here. People that can get trained and people who have, let's say that people who can and people who can't. Can the people who can't get trained? Yes, they can. But I was talking about really, what are we doing with the people who can't? The people who can, I think we're pouring money into training. The United States is leading the world in intangible investments. Intangible investments are way up over time relative to capital investments. We're pouring money into information technology. We're pouring money into software. We're pouring money into online training. For the group of people that can get trained, and really there's a multiplicative effect to it. I think you're going to find we're doing an awful lot of training, and it's moving online. I had a long conversation with the guy with Khan of Khan Academy. The stuff's powerful stuff that they can do. They can figure out where you're making mistakes, go back, and instead of having to give you the general training, they go, look, you really didn't understand lesson number 22, and they can reteach you lesson 22 because 23 builds on 22 and has cascading problems. And when it comes to things like nursing, I think that piece of it's getting handled quite effectively. I think on the other side of the divide, and I know it's a spectrum, and I hate to say that somebody can't be trained because everybody can be trained, but I think people underestimate, how many engineers McDonald's has trying to figure out how to take a person who might only be working there 3 months, is very young and very unskilled, probably doesn't have great math skills. They've changed the cash register so you can press a button and say, quarter pounder with cheese value meal, as opposed to what you had to do 20 years ago, which is kind of figure out the number, add it up, and make the change. So have they made that person more productive? Yes, but what they do is they go, look, the minimum wage is $7.50 an hour. How can I get this person who on their own would only produce $6.50 an hour, and therefore no customer would ever hire them because the customer can't hire you if you can't produce $7.50 of value. What technology could I put in place to push this person up? And part of the technology you're putting in place to push them up is supervision. And so you're constantly saying, look, I'll take a $7.50 guy plus $5 of supervision, $12, or I'll hire a part-time housewife to come and work for the $12 that she'll be willing to do it at. If I can get $7.50 plus, $4 and I get to $11.50 versus $12, then I hire the low skilled guy as opposed to the higher skilled guy. All of the wages sort of line up onto the spectrum, but there's an awful lot of engineering going on into the McDonald's of the world, where you go, how can I take this group down here who otherwise wouldn't get employed? And with a certain amount of technology and a certain amount of supervision, I can make it competitive with a higher wage, more capable person. And so I think that is what the Ubers and the Uber Eats and all those guys do, right? Because one of the things, if you hire people to pick you up, the biggest problem is they don't show up. And then you go, wait, I got to go to the airport, but the car isn't here. So, you go, I can't afford to hire the car if I don't have assurance that the car is going to be here. Okay, then they got to pay more because the guy's got to come an hour early, and you got to be able to look out your window and go, the guy's there. Uber solves that. Okay, if the first guy doesn't come, the second guy's right around the corner. If he doesn't come, the third guy comes and the fourth guy comes. You can still get into problems, but you can still get delays, but a lot less delays. So many of the problems, it's being solved by technology, but it's allowing a lower skill person who might not be as dependable. One of the biggest obstacles, the first thing to do to get a guy to be higher skilled is to get him to be more reliable. It's like we're opening up the warehouse at 8 a.m. We need you there to pick. And when you pick, you have to pick the right stuff, because if you send the wrong stuff to the customer, he's not going to be the customer anymore. That is the biggest. Anyway, I'm trying to do a divide, and I picked one side of the divide. I think the other side of the divide, where we're effective on training, that's taking off on its own. What I think you always have to worry about is you got a software programmer who's a constrained resource, and which problem is he going to work on? Training nurses or figuring out how to put $7 an hour people to work? If you had an infinite supply, you'd be working on everything, but you're not. Oh, by the way, they're not even going like, hey, I don't even want to work with the nurses. I want to work on the computer programmers. Oh, I don't want to work on the computer programmers. I want to work on the decision makers. So they're all drifting up to the high end of the value. And what I would say is I do believe we've opened up this niche of information technology, and people have moved into certain niches. But what I see in our companies is tons of unfilled niches. Right? So, I sit on the board of a company. We're 50% of the market. Our biggest problem is we see all these niches that we can't fill, and we can't hire the programmers to fill them. So we go, okay, we got a programmer and we got a niche. We're going to fill this niche. But guess what? The competitor who's got 20% market share, he hires a programmer and he fills another niche. And once he gets that niche and we get this niche, we can't get his niche and he can't get our niche. But we keep going. We're losing market share because we can't fill up 50% of the niches because we don't have the skill, the talent, the programmers. And you talk to anybody, Meg Whitman was HP, worked at Bain, close to Mitt. All she would talk about when she was the CEO of HP is how she can't get any engineers. So there's tons of unsolved problems and tons of opportunities. But what's happening then is that everybody's migrating to the highest value added, not how do I get the $7 an hour guy to be more reliable? That's a 50-cent problem. How do I make a CEO more effective? That's a multi-million-dollar opportunity. So, I don't know how we solve that part of it, but I get down to the nitty-gritty of what's going on. Every now and then people get these breakthroughs, which are things like Uber, where you can supervise a ton of low-skilled workers with practically no talent at all. It's all in the programming. In the same way that when the machine gets structured, it makes manufacturing productivity grow. It is the software structuring that is going to make the low-skilled productivity grow in the long run. But the problem is getting programmers to actually do the work because they get better opportunities. I don't know. This is complicated stuff. I mean,
Would this be a role for the government to, for instance, give out a ton of scholarships to people to study computer science and engineering, and or I don't know, cancel student debt if people go in certain fields rather than bullshit subjects or something like that, so that you increase that demand and not just have the very best people go into programming and go to Google?
Yeah, my inclination is to say yes with the following caveat, which is some talented person has got to stop doing what they're doing and start doing that, teaching that, right? And the question is, well, why are they doing what they're doing and not doing that? Presumably because what they were doing was more valuable and paid them more. So we get into the, can we engineer it better than the survival of the fittest can allocate it? When you say what you're saying, I think, yes, I would have a policy, which is if you're not pursuing a education that's going to help your fellow man quite directly, I'd get the government out of the business of subsidizing that. And I know a lot of college professors may not want to hear that point of view. Okay. So would I try through, I'm already subsidizing a lot of education. The taxpayers are already subsidizing a lot of education. If I were the taxpayers, I'd be more inclined to say, I'm going to subsidize what helps me directly and less so what's indirect. And I'd say, look, at a lot of the stuff that's indirect is a luxury, and people who can afford luxuries should go afford their luxuries. But I'm a taxpayer and I can't afford that luxury. So what I need is computer programmers. So I'm going to pay for computer programmers. I'm not going to pay for philosophers. Yes, that would be my inclination. And what you're doing is reallocating the subsidy, not increasing it, if you will. So yeah, but when I had a debate with Glenn Hubbard. He has an idea, which is, he had a paper called Building Bridges, Not Walls. Thoughtful title, I thought. And it was, we should invest more money in community colleges to help the people who are not going to go to college and to be in the next tier, the 60th percentile person, to be a more skillful person. I think that's probably a really valuable idea. I think the hard part to understand, and the part I tried to talk to him about, was, where do we get that professor, that community college teacher from? And why is it that they're going to create more value teaching community college than they would have, say, be an electrician on a job, giving 5 electricians on the job training, doing the job on the job? Why do we think taking them from there and moving them over to the school is necessarily going to make them more productive and more value adding? Because in the survival of the fittest world, he ended up on the job training people, not over here in the college teaching people. How do we do that calculation? Because when you say let's have more community college, you're talking about reallocating talent. What's the opportunity cost of moving the talent from one area to this? And why do you think it's more here versus there? Why can't you trust we often can't trust them. Look, in education, we know, we need the government's help because people, you're getting the value in the future, but you don't have the money today. So, people are going to get undereducated relative to the optimal because of the economics of it. So we know that. We know that we need to subsidize education if we want to get the optimal amount of education given the way the economics work. But, it's not clear to me that we actually know how to do the reallocation. But on the surface, my inclination would be to agree that, same thing happens, I think, when people say, let's do more government R&D. It's like, where are the researchers going to come from? They're going to stop doing something and start doing something else. It's not like we just manufactured them out of thin air. And we know that, as we've expanded the number of researchers, the test scores of researchers is going down on the margin. It's not like there's an infinite number of smart people to be researchers. So we all go, let's increase government R&D, and everybody nods their head, yes, we need more R&D. We know we're probably underinvesting in it, but are we really going to get more R&D? When we say we want to cure global warming, my own view would be this: hey, Europe, you're the guys who should be doing the global warming R&D because you're not doing the IT R&D. We're doing the IT R&D. So let's not take our IT guys and start working on global warming. If we want to subsidize global warming, we should be paying European researchers to research global warming. Now, nobody in America would ever agree to do that because we think we got an infinite supply and, more research is better. But I think what we do is we get the global warming research, but we get less of less of the medical research. Meanwhile, we got researchers over in Europe where we go, they need to be more productive. Let's create a synergistic community there. But no one's going there, so I don't.
You'd be a great teacher, but you just explained why you're not one.
You have a moral obligation to run for president. I stand firm on that. So I
don't think the author of The Upside of Inequality is getting elected president. Few hurdles there, I think.
Yeah.
So last chance to ask your $1 million question. I think that's probably, I don't know your hourly wage rate, Ed, but it would be $1 million question you get to answer.
I was once fixing my neighbor's fence because it was not abandoned, it was a construction lot next to me. Somebody bought a lot, didn't fix it. Fence was falling down. I'm over there fixing it. And my other next door neighbor said, hey, I got a few tasks I'd like you to do. I said, I don't think you can afford it.
Well, okay. Should we stop? Are you up for more? I guess we have them. I have a question as to, is the future basically something like Amazon companies and much more very big businesses that can fill all sorts of niches? And is that another way to avoid the universal basic income that might be looming? Are you a UBA guy?
Well, I'll say this about universal basic income. My own view is it demotivates as many people as it motivates. So, I think we all have this perspective from a very smart person, which is we're getting a lot of intellectual satisfaction from our work. And I'm doing it for free. You guys are all kind of doing it for free too. I mean, you could have gone off and probably been the CEO of companies or, corporate lawyers or all that stuff. We get a lot of intellectual satisfaction from work. You don't get any satisfaction flipping hamburgers, okay? You detest it. Yeah, we can talk all we want about the pride of this and that, but you know what? There's a lot of my buddy working in the sewers, he's it's grinding it out there every day. It's cold, his bones ache. He's not going, hey, today's my day to go to work. And I think he does take great pride in earning a living for his family. So I do think it's important in that way. But my point being, at that end of the spectrum, I think there are as many people who are saying, if I get paid another couple dollars an hour, I will work a couple hours less, because I've organized my life to work at this level. And what I don't want to do is work. I want work stinks, okay? And so I think there's another group of people down there, probably my buddy is one of them. If you paid him another $5, he'd work overtime and go and try to get the money because he wants to do whatever he wants to do. But my sense is, having given a lot of money to family members, by the way, that, you know, they fall into two buckets. They will work less and they will work more. So my own view on universal basic income is it's going to end up being kind of a wash. It might be a little more positive than negative, but, you know, the history of workforce participation at the low end of the workforce, at the low end of the test scores, is less participation over time by, say, you know, women entered the workforce, obviously it increased, but if we look at men, for example, less participation over the time, fewer hours and less participation, the less money you earn, and more participation and more hours, the more money you earn. You'd think it would be exactly the opposite, but you know, we're all getting intellectual satisfaction, and a lot of people are getting a lot of satisfaction from work, but not on the end where we're talking about universal basic income having an impact. I think those people are going, work stinks, and I'm looking for a way to, some of them are looking for a way to get more money, and some of them are looking for a way to get, and I'm not begrudging them like they're lazy or anything. It's like, why would you want to go to work and flip burgers and inhale grease all day long? It's kind of illogical to want to do that. So, you know, the other thing I would tell you is just keep in mind the numbers I showed you. It's $33,000. If you earn them $13,000 a year, there are very few like single mothers earning the minimum wage, by the way, because mothers are more responsible and harder working than that. So they end up making like $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour. But, you know, you earn about $13,000 a year, which is 1,000 hours at $13. It's 2,000 hours at, you know, $7. The government will give you about $33,000 of benefits, which will bring you up to about $47,000. You divide that by 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours with your preference, you know, you're talking about $20 to $40 an hour is the real wage. So you throw $2 a universal basic income on there, you ought to keep it in perspective, because an awful lot of people are comparing it to $7.50 and saying, what kind of motivation will I get at $9.50? But the real minimum wage is not, it is for 18-year-olds selling ice cream in the summer, okay? But if you're really talking about 40-year-old single mothers trying to raise 2 kids, they're getting a lot of money from the government. That's not that universal basic income. They're not talking about enough to make a difference. And in many cases, I don't even know, guys like Andrew Yang, they're talking about like consolidating all the programs and giving everybody 15. It's like, hey, I got news for you. We're giving all the people who need it 33, not 15. So be very careful when you take 18 away from the people who need it so that you can give 15 to the people who don't need it. Like, the whole reason why we have all the means testing on this stuff, and the reason why we have many different programs, is like, why do we want to give energy credits to people who are living in the South? Why do we want to give, you know, preschool credits or you know, preschool credits to kids who are in the parents who have kids in the public school? You know, do we want to give as much Section H housing to people outside of New York as people inside of New York who are paying much higher rent? We have a whole bunch of programs because we have a whole bunch of problems, you know, to solve. So the idea that we're just going to have spread the peanut butter over the whole country and treat everybody the same seems, to me, a very good political spiel, but pretty naive idea for programs.
Avi has another question.
You mentioned the difference between Europe, Asia, and America in terms of really the performance, high skill versus low skill. Is there any country in the world that has a better performance record or ratio than the United States? And I guess the corollary to that is, could you come up with a formula whereby if the United States is doing better, is there a formulaic approach that a country could use that would, in effect, produce an optimal result that might be better even than the United States?
So I think the first, maybe Luxembourg, because it's not really a country, but I don't think there's any country that's coming close. Okay. And I think on the formula, first you have to get the ideas that create the value, and then you can figure out what to do with the value. And so what the United States has done is built the institutional capabilities, the Googles, the Microsofts of the world. They've built the Silicon Valley. They've built the venture capital industry, just all in information technology, but this extends out to Hollywood, the medical industry, other places as well. So there's no formula that's going to get you that. That's decades and decades of successful risk taking. And, so I don't think like we can say to Europe, oh, cut your tax rate and you're going to grow faster. It's what they try to do in Kansas. Okay. No one's moving to Kansas, even if the growth rate's zero, even if the tax rate's negative. We'll pay you to move to Kansas. You're not moving to Kansas. There's no ideas in Kansas. There's no infrastructure in Kansas. The tax rate doesn't matter in Kansas. Okay. Maybe it does for farmers, but it doesn't matter for tech entrepreneurs. So, what can Europe do? They have to build the infrastructure to get the ideas, to get the positive feedback loop, to get the synergies so that the tax rate matters. I don't know there's no substitute for the hard work, the risk taking, the entrepreneurial success. Once you get the feedback loop going, now maybe they can subsidize and seed, but like what I would be doing to them, if I really wanted to solve global warming, I would be trying to become the technical hub of global warming. I think they've done a pretty good job at pharmaceuticals. We're basically splitting pharmaceuticals with most of the high wage countries. Japan's got a lot, Europe's got a lot, we've got a lot. I think they're catching up slowly in software, but they're probably never going to get there. They're largely trying to attack our high-tech companies. That's the way to set them back. But I'm being a little facetious there when I say
what did happen here and nowhere else?
So can I answer that as, I don't know. I said in my talk, 3 things might have happened. Happenstance. Why is this speck of the universe here? Because there was some quantum flux before the expansion that caused it to the seed to land here and not over there. So why there's random flux, happenstance is probably the answer. We also know there was a lot of the US has invested a lot of money in military R&D. I have this inkling that military R&D is more effective than R&D in general, because you say, if I don't solve the problem, I'm going to get annihilated. And I've put somebody in charge to solve the problem. And if they don't solve the problem, they're going to get fired. And it turns out that a lot of the military problems are just general purpose problems, processing information, positioning, GPS positioning, all internet communication. So for some weird reason, it seems like and I'm not advocating military technology. I'm trying to answer your question. It doesn't seem surprising that Silicon Valley grew up around where a lot of military technology was being invested. And I think happenstance, you get Intel, you're going to get a PC industry, you're going to get PC related software programming. Why did Intel end up in Silicon Valley? The answer might be military R&D. It might be happenstance.
It didn't work in Russia.
Right, because they got other problems. I mean, it's amazing though that, they need freedom and capitalism, because they sure did have the engineers. We've been the biggest beneficiaries of it. So what did I said? Happenstance. I think military R&D. I mean, I'd go back and look. I had one more thing that I said there that I don't remember, but I don't know. But once it happens, then I think you get this positive feedback loop. Whereas you're mining the frontier, and the frontier spinning off really valuable ideas. And so, you start harvesting those ideas and you take more risks because the payoffs are better and your chances of success are better. And therefore the expected value, it's just like playing poker. You put more money in the pot when you're going to win the pot, and try to win the pot because the math makes sense. And so once you get the positive feedback loop, then I think it starts building on itself. But it doesn't just, it builds very slowly, which is first somebody has to take a risk and succeed. So you get a little bit of success from a large pool of failure. And then after they succeed, that has to create institutional capabilities, Google, Facebook, Intel, whatever, Silicon Valley, the venture capital industry. And that magnifies the productivity of the risk of the innovators and increases the expected value of the payoffs. But that takes decades. And so, it's not like Europe's going to cut their tax rate and start growing faster tomorrow. And oh, by the way, it's compounding over time. It's not like, it's not linear. So it's going up like this, but for 10 years, 20 years, you're going to see very little. And sure, now we go back 20 years later, we see a big difference. We went from about being 18% richer than the Germans on average to 28% richer than the Germans on average. We've seen a 10% gain in our middle class as a result. And looking at the top of the income, to get the 10% in the middle, it's taken almost double the wages at the top. I mean, we're off the charts at the top end of the scale. I don't know, how it starts. Why did capitalism start in England in the 1700s? I don't know. I mean, it just did. I'm not even saying it started there, but somehow something weird happened there that's hard to understand.
Ed, I've got to stop, but this has been wonderfully instructive and entertaining.
And we can take David Epstein's question if you're still up for it after Harvey leaves.
Okay.
Thanks. Right.
Thank you, Harvey. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
This is very unconventional, but we still have so many people here, so why not? Go for it, David.
I admire your stamina. Just was wondering if a high-skilled person thinks of a way to make low-skilled people more productive, do the low-skilled people reap the income benefit, or does the high-skilled person reap the income benefit?
So here's the research on it. Okay. Norquist, who won the Nobel Prize trying to figure this out, and also figured out global warming, said the innovator creates about $20 of value for every dollar he puts in his pocket. So if we look at the Gateses of the world and the Jobs of the world, certainly the Microsoft computer programming has been way more valuable to the world than it's been for Bill Gates. So his estimate was 20 to 1. I in my first book, I said, okay, it's probably 20 to 1, but no liberal economist would disagree with 5 to 1. I'll tell you a little story related to this. And I said, look, but so you got to create $5 of value for other people to put $1 in your pocket. But let's not kid ourselves. A big chunk of the $5 ends up in the pocket of the rich guys. Okay. So in the book, I said, hey, my estimation is about $3 ends up in the pocket of everybody else, and $2 ends up back in the guy's pocket again. So, let's assume it's $3 of value instead of $1. And then I did some calculations in the book of $3. Now, because Mitt Romney was running for president and everybody thought they could read my book and understand Mitt's view of the world, I ended up on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. They did a study, and Dean Baker is a liberal economist, and they said, hey, Ed Conard's study says it's 20 to 1. And he said, Dean's, famous liberal economist, it's not 20 to 1, but nobody would disagree with 5 to 1. So I call up, by the way, the publisher of the New York Times Sunday magazine, and I say, hey, you guys misquoted me. And you said I said 20 to 1. I didn't say 20 to 1. I said 5 to 1. And in fact, I said, let's discount it to 3 to 1. And even Dean Baker, liberal economists, agreed that it was 5 to 1. And the publisher said to me, shut up, you whiny bitch. I got you 1 million people to view your work. Go do something with it. And I said, no more truth has ever been spoken. Thank you very much. Okay. So I think the number is like 3 to 5 to 1 is the answer to the question. And I feel like I got vindicated, but I can only say it to small groups, because no one's ever going to listen to my longer explanation of it. But
we were all misled.
We were all misled by the New York Times, yes.
As we are daily.
Anyway, 5 to 1 is what I think it is.
But how does that work with an unskilled worker? If there are many other unskilled people waiting in the wings, does he have any additional bargaining power from your ability to make him more useful?
I don't think I don't think he's got any additional bargaining power. I think he gets paid the market wage for unskilled labor, which is some function of the demand for unskilled labor and the supply of unskilled labor, right? There's no how to think about the value is a very complicated thing. So, what I want to do is increase the number of high skilled, hold the number of low skilled, change the ratio, increase the demand, drive up the wage. I don't think he's got any negotiating leverage. And I always find it ironic because a lot of liberal economists say, look, one of the reasons why labor's share of the GDP is going down is because they don't have bargaining power. They need unions for bargaining power. It's like, hey, if you're going to open up the borders and you're going to immigration and trade, what do you think is going to happen to the bargaining power of the low skilled guy? Okay. But I think it really works like this is how I would describe it. You got three components, and this is grossly simplistic, and any economist who wants to hit me on the side of the head with a baseball bat for this can, but you've got the talented people, and let's say they're creating $5 of value for every dollar that they keep for themselves, and then they recapture $2, so there's another $3 out there. Okay, that $3 gets spread over everybody else. And everybody else basically is performing the marginal product of labor. What's the marginal product of labor? Low-skilled waiter waiting on a low-skilled waiter. Now we know in the world, that's $3 an hour. Maybe if you take that person and you put them in the highway system of the United States and with televisions and communications and Wall Street and everything else, it's $7 an hour. It's probably not $15 an hour. So, and it's true that, supply creates its own demand. If you add another immigrant, they'll create another $3 or $7 an hour. So my question is always, yeah, it does, but at what marginal product of labor? So you just keep adding them and they just keep going at $5. So what's happening is the $3 that got created up here that's getting spread is getting spread over more people. So these guys are going to get their $3 an hour or $7 an hour, plus whatever's up here created by the talented people that wasn't recaptured by the talented people, divided by all the people in this pool. And that'll drive them up. And now it won't be equal like this. It's a shadow price. So it's going to be like that, where the last guy out here is probably getting $7 or $3. But, and somebody over here, because we know this, if you're a waiter waiting on waiters, you're going to get minimum wage. That's somebody working in a diner making $7.50 an hour, not getting many tips, and a very small check. Oh, by the way, if you're working over here in some fancy restaurant full of the most talented people in the world as the customers, yeah, you got more talent than that guy, but not, most of the talent is you just take a shower and show up to work on time and take your job seriously, and you're going to get paid a lot of money over here. And that really is shadow price, because really, economics would say everybody should get paid the marginal product of labor, which would be $7.50 an hour. Now, they're capturing more of that value that's being created up here because they have a higher skill level. But how much negotiating leverage do they have? There's no shortage of people that want to work in the highest skilled restaurants. So it doesn't get divided equally. But what we want this group to do, I think, is create more and more value. They're going to recapture some. All the rest is going to get split up by everybody else. It's going to make their wages higher, and then restrict the number of people here for two reasons. One is we don't need to get the waiter waiting on waiters and the guy cutting the hedges. All he does is drive the whole thing, the marginal product, down on everybody. You go, hey, I don't want that. I want this to be $50 an hour. So you're not going to cut your hedges. So the marginal product's never going to get down to hedge cutting. We don't want waiters waiting on waiters, because then the price will get down to $7 an hour. But we want to back up here and go, you know what? We don't want you rich guy to have 10 toilets that never get used. Because when the plumber comes out and the cleaning lady comes out, it's going to cost you a lot of money to have that toilet. We don't want you to have that toilet. We don't want that marginal product of labor to get that low. And the value that's being created by the talent over here that's spilling over to everybody else, we want that divided up among less people. Will we grow slower? We'll grow slower. Will they be happier? They'll be happier and richer as a result. That's income redistribution done by the market instead of by the government. Would I prefer to keep the rent-seeking politicians out of the redistribution? Yeah. Will it get largely redistributed as workfare instead of welfare? Yeah, and we're going to have to loop around and help the people that can't work. I think we're helping them a lot, and I think we got to be thoughtful of those people. A single mother, she's not going to be able to work full-time. A person with disabilities is not going to be able to work full-time. What are we going to leave them all behind? It's not, it doesn't work. Anyway, there's my math.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be the Oren Cass here because we're Case. I don't really mostly disagree with what he has to say. But, one of the things I think is interesting is thinking about, a certain kind of new worker organization, especially like gig workers, the electricians, International Electrician Order of Brotherhood, those kind of union organizations, basically, where they're trades organizations, but it's not really based on employee manager friction, but is much more about independent contractors coming together to provide benefits and create a stable job market.
Like a guild hall,
That's kind of an answer to part of this, right? Because in that way, you do get some organization among the workers at large that can negotiate with, skilled people that might be able to spread out some of the benefits, take some of the toilet money away and put it back into the pockets of people who are working.
My worry always is this. So anything that restricts the supply, including my proposal on immigration, reallocates money from one group to another. I fully acknowledge the reallocation I'm trying to get here. If I go, I worked in the auto industry. We had, heavy labor unions, but it's kind of like, did they really care? Did the GM, Ford, and Chrysler really care? They went, look, we don't care whether the wage is $25 an hour or $70 an hour, as long as all the competitors are paying the same wage, because then we're just passing it on to the consumer. And, we got our capital and we're getting our return on capital, and we've got engineers and we're getting our return on engineers. And then we're just passing the cost through to everybody else. So who was really paying for the $70 an hour? Was it the capital owners of Ford Motor Company? I don't think so. Was it the managers and the talent of Ford Motor Company? It was the guys who were buying cars. Okay, so by and large, it was the workers, although it was one set of workers who were not unionized, paying higher prices for cars to another set of workers who were unionized. So that's how I saw it, as just a reallocation. I didn't see it as actually extracting money from the group of people that you would want to extract it from, if you will. I mean, I think taxes can extract it, but so I understand what people want to accomplish with labor unions by restricting the supply of labor. It doesn't, if you let one industry do it and not another, and the way the auto industry and many other unionized industries got killed was, we opened up the borders and all of a sudden the unions weren't the same. And then they went, hey, I can't pay the guy $70 an hour. So I'm basically going out of business slowly over time. Then people, oh, your cars stink. Well, yeah, because I can't afford to reinvest the money, and I don't have as high a profit margin because I'm paying 70 with full benefits and they're paying 35 with full benefits, and I'm going out of business. But until then, all it was a reallocation. But I didn't see it reallocating among the people we wanted. It was one set of consumers to another set of workers, I found. So, there might be reasons for cooperatives and risk sharing and things like that, but extracting money from one group to another, I'm not sure it gets there, but.
Okay, Ed, we can't pay your honorarium anymore if we keep going. So I think
whatever you want. I'm donating the honorarium.
Unless there's another burning question, this is amazing that we have access to you for so long.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Otherwise,
Great questions. Really, really great questions. Usually I get questions I can't understand. These questions I go, man, they're too complicated for me to know the answer to them. But they're important questions, I think. Really, really good stuff. Thank you. I enjoyed it, I'll tell you that. I mean, everybody enjoys blathering and pontificating, but I love the questions. I love them. I wish I had better answers, but.
No, you've had great answers. So I could ask you questions all day, but we'll stop because we're going to put this on YouTube, and who's going to watch a 5-hour? Well, maybe people will. We got to break it up. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And we'll have you back.
Next time.
And honored everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.